Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere cold, so cold that your breath turns into crystals before you finish your first sentence. You're in Moscow, sometime in the early 1950s. The streets are hushed beneath a heavy sheet of snow, and chimneys tilt like gray towers against a sky that never really brightens in winter. Somewhere nearby, a loudspeaker crackles awake, spreading the day's state, approved truths over the rooftops. You pull your blanket tighter, wondering if it's worth getting up yet or if you can pretend to sleep through the anthem. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this if you oversleep. The factory clock, after all, waits for no one. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're listening from tonight and what time it is there. Are you warm? Maybe wrapped in a blanket? Good. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to the smell of boiled buckwheat and burnt paraffin oil. Your apartment block stands like a concrete monolith under a washed-out sky. Its gray facade spattered with the stories of its residents. Hundreds of them, all living nearly identical lives. Somewhere a baby wails. Someone bangs a radiator pipe to get the last sputter of warmth. The radio drones with the same voice every morning, reading quotes from Pravda, as if reminding you that thought is a shared possession. When you step into the stairwell, you notice how your footsteps echo against the spiraling staircase. Every sound bounces too far, amplified by concrete and loneliness. The air smells faintly of dried paint, socks, and yesterday's smoke. Someone left their newspaper on the landing. You recognize the portrait of a leader staring back with the usual solemnity. His eyebrows look heavier every year. Outside, trams screech around corners like tired metal beasts. Workers in thick coats queue for bread, their breath rising in steady plumes. An old woman sells sunflower seeds from a jar, her fingers red and cracked. Your boots crunch in packed snow, and for a moment, you trick yourself into thinking you like this. It's quiet in a way that modern chaos rarely allows. Each sound deliberate, spaced apart, as if the whole city is walking on eggshells. The day begins in a rhythm you already know by heart. Check ration cards, stand in line, stamp your work permit, don't forget your lunch tin. In 1950s Moscow, every citizen plays a prescribed role in a massive play directed by invisible hands. Historians still argue whether the average person truly believed in the slogans covering the factory walls or simply played along out of habit. The truth probably lies somewhere between faith and exhaustion. One mainstream fact to ground us: during Stalin's final years, Moscow had more than 20,000 communal apartments, each cramming multiple families into shared spaces. You imagine the muffled coughs, whispered arguments, and careful politeness in those hallways, privacy replaced by partitions of thin plywood and patience. As you walk toward the metro, a uniformed man sweeps snow off the Lenin statue at the corner. The bronze face gleams under gray clouds, like he's still watching, still measuring your loyalty in posture and punctuality. Beneath his pedestal, someone's carved a tiny heart, almost daringly. It's quickly covered again by fresh snow, impermanence as rebellion. A metro entrance yawns open like a cavern beneath the city. The escalator hums downward with mechanical pride. Light bulbs line the descent, each reflected in chrome railings. Little halos in the underground gloom. You stand shoulder to shoulder with people who all avoid eye contact, pretending not to breathe the same recycled air. Somewhere, a violinist plays a melancholy tune that somehow manages to sound patriotic. Or maybe everything sounds patriotic down here. The train doors slam shut with the weight of inevitability, and you sway as it rattles through tunnels carved during the war. They say the subway doubles as a shelter if the unthinkable ever happens. You imagine the tunnels filling with people, their whispers swallowed by the rumble of trains above. There's comfort in routine, there's danger in thinking beyond it. Now and then, You spot propaganda posters inside the carriage. Bright, bold colors promising progress and glory. Workers stride heroically, holding wheat or wrenches, their teeth gleaming white. There's no room for tired faces like yours in those pictures. A man across from you reads a small book with no title on the cover. His eyes dart up nervously each time the car shudders. You wonder what he's reading, but you don't ask. In this city, curiosity has sharp edges. Then there's the quirky detail the textbooks rarely linger on. Moscow residents used frozen potatoes as ice packs and tiny space heaters made of stacked bricks and candles to keep rooms tolerably warm. You picture your future self crouched by such an improvised contraption, half proud, half desperate, telling yourself this counts as innovation. By midday, the sun, such as it is, droops low behind the apartment skyline. You grab a bowl of soup, thin and slightly sour, from a corner canteen. The women ladling it out wear white aprons and smiles constructed from muscle memory. A poster behind them declares, "Ork is honor." No one laughs, though a man at the end of the counter mutters something about honor not filling stomachs. His friend elbows him sharply. The band on the loudspeaker switches to a cheerful march. Crisis averted. You pass a bookstore window filled with Marx, Lenin, and thick biographies of productive heroes. The price tags feel almost ceremonial. Few can afford the books, but they aren't meant for reading anyway. Somewhere near the back, dust gathers on a copy of Crime and Punishment, tucked between speeches on agricultural reform. You pause at the irony. Dostoevsky, a man obsessed with guilt, now surviving quietly among revolutionary manifestos. As evening falls, the city transforms again. Lamplight spills across icy pavements, drawing long shadows that make every passerby look heroic or hunted, depending on your mood. You inhale deeply, and the air snaps cold against your teeth. Smoke drifts from chimneys, carrying traces of coal, cabbage, and fatigue. Children run laughing across the snow until a mother calls them back sharply. Playfulness still allowed, but only within boundaries. When you finally reach home, the shared hallway is full of muffled radio shows and clattering dishes. Someone is singing an old folk song, slightly off, key but wholehearted. You find your corner, pull off your boots, and let your toes thaw under the small heater. For a brief moment, warmth feels like victory. Outside, the tram's bell rings through the twilight. You think about the day, the sameness of it all, the quiet dignity people still manage to hold. Maybe that's the secret, that even under gray skies, humanity sneaks in between ration cards and slogans, refusing to fade completely. Tomorrow, the anthem will blare again, the cues will reform, and you'll play your part once more. But for now, in the calm of your room, you close your eyes, listening to the radiator tick like a tired metronome counting down the hours until dawn. The city exhales, and you do too. Morning again. The same crisp bite in the air greets your waking lungs, but this time you're not alone. The walls are paper, thin, and every sound has a personality. A child coughs somewhere behind you, someone clanks a pot, and through the peeling wallpaper leaks the faint strain of a radio playing a waltz from last year's patriotic film. Welcome to the communal apartment. The communalka, your new habitat, and the heart of daily Soviet existence for millions. You step into the narrow corridor barefoot and instantly regret it. The floorboards feel like refrigerated steel. Your breath fogs, mixing with someone else's cooking fumes. The hallway lights are dim, their bulbs flickering weakly like they, too, know how long this morning will be. You squeeze past a bicycle balanced against the wall, avoiding the slop bucket marked, for cleaning only, that everyone ignores. In this long, echoing corridor lives a mini-society. 6 families share one kitchen, one toilet, and one unspoken code of survival. Keep to yourself unless bribery or bread is involved. On the door opposite yours, an old lady named Clara has glued newspaper cutouts of roses to look fancy. She's been here since before the war and guards the communal telephone like it's a national relic. You nod politely when you pass her. Though politeness, in this place, is as much defense as decency. The kitchen, when you reach it, smells simultaneously of everything and nothing: cabbage, soap, tea, damp wool, and the faint musk of kerosene. Pots bubble away on two stoves, each belonging to someone's turn. Never, ever touch another's pot. Historians still argue whether more friendships or feuds were born from stealing someone's burner time. You find your own dented saucepan, your spoon marked with scratches from years of stirring. Breakfast is kasha again, because of course it is. As you eat, a radio voice floats in from the living room. The same monotone announcer reading triumphant crop reports. You know the statistics by heart, though no one in your block has seen a decent orange in years. Still, you let it wash over you. The sound means routine, and routine means safety. A woman laughs suddenly at the far end of the hall. Everyone looks up. Lauder here feels like a foreign tourist that got lost and wandered in. There's a mainstream historical truth to cling to. By the mid-1950s, over 1/3 of urban Soviets lived in shared communalkas. Privacy was sacrificed to house wartime refugees and industrial workers. Each family occupied one room, sleeping, eating, and existing in that single box, while kitchens and toilets became communal battlegrounds for passive aggression. You rinse your bowl in water that runs lukewarm at best and rejoin the queue forming outside the bathroom door. Someone's left hairpins in the soap dish again. The man ahead of you, a teacher, mutters under his breath about moving to a new housing block. Next year, they promise. You nod sympathetically, remembering that next year has been a promise since you were tall enough to reach the faucet. Inside the room, condensation covers the window. You can barely make out the courtyard below, where laundry lines sway like ghostly flags. The building's superintendent, affectionately called Unclepedia, though he's younger than your uncle, drags a shovel through snow, clearing a narrow path between mounds of ice. You'll spend the next 5 minutes brushing your teeth with mint paste diluted in baking soda, staring into the cracked mirror taped over a piece of cardboard. Welcome to communal glamour. Once dressed, you make your way back to your corner room. The heater clicks bitterly. It's on, but not committed. You put on your thickest socks and glance at the calendar on the wall. It's marked not with holidays, but with ration dates and laundry turns. Even life's rhythm is shared, pre-allocated, and logged. Still, there's solidarity in small rituals. You borrow a teaspoon of sugar from next door, promising to repay when the store restocks. The neighbor, Victor, the former engineer turned watch repairer, smiles faintly. Everyone in this building used to be something grander. You step outside onto the tiny balcony. Cold needles your face instantly, but the view rewards you. A maze of rooftops, puffing white smoke, pigeons bobbing like gray punctuation marks on ledges, and below, children sliding down frozen snowbanks on scrap wood. Someone's hung a string of pine branches between windows, a humble attempt at decoration. You wave to a woman across the courtyard. She waves back with a kitchen spoon still dripping soup. Connection, Soviet style. Here's a quirky tidbit: in many communalkas, residents used colored clothespins or toothbrush covers to claim ownership of limited space. People sometimes drew chalk circles around their section of floor in the fridge. The Cold War truly began with territorial disputes over pickles. Inside, someone knocks. It's Clara, again, asking who left muddy footprints near the door. You genuinely don't know, but explaining innocence feels like extra labor. She sighs dramatically and mutters about young people today, even though you're 30. As she leaves, you catch a whiff of her lilac perfume, stronger than memory itself. Somehow it makes you smile. You sit on your bed, if bed is the right word. It's half sofa, half relic, creaking with every shift. A draft sneaks under the window frame. You wrap yourself tighter in your blanket, listening to the muffled orchestra of the building, kettles whistling, kettles arguing, babies crying, toilets flushing in rhythmic sequence. And above it all, the occasional chuckle of a neighbor pretending this life is normal. Yet, in a strange way, it is. Historians still debate whether communal living destroyed the sense of individuality or forged a unique collective spirit that later generations would miss. People learned patience, negotiation, silence. You learned the power of lowering your voice, of letting someone else finish their complaint before you add yours. By nightfall, the hallway dims again. The smell of evening stew, heavy with onions and ambition, spreads through every crack. Neighbors exchange gossip under their breaths. One woman recalls how her cousin once saw a Western fridge on television, white and humming like magic. Everyone laughs softly, picturing such decadence. A man strums an out-of-tune guitar, a few children hum along. For a fleeting moment, harmony actually exists. Thin, fragile, and utterly pure. You fall asleep to the sound of that guitar straining through the corridor, thinking about how a building so crowded can still feel lonely. The wind outside howls against the glass, but inside, the warmth of shared breath and shared suffering tucks you in. Every creak, every whisper, every spoon clink becomes part of a collective lullaby. Tomorrow will look the same, but somehow, that sameness feels like the only thing keeping the world upright. The sound of boots scuffing on cobblestones pulls you from half sleep. It's early, too early. But life in the Soviet Union doesn't care about comfort. Today you join the ritual of the orchard, the queue, the ration line, the unending snake of waiting, patience, and quiet negotiation. Everyone you know spends a portion of their life in it. It's where news travels faster than radio and where social rank dissolves beneath frost and fatigue. You pull on your heavy coat and step outside. The cold nips at your nose like an impatient teacher. Down the street, a queue has already formed in front of the bakery. No one knows exactly what's being sold, but that's not important. Maybe oranges, maybe butter, maybe nothing at all. You just join. That's how this works. You see a line, you stand in it, and only later do you discover whether you wasted 2 hours or struck liquid gold in the form of cooking oil. The woman ahead of you nods politely. She's wearing a faded headscarf and holding her ration card like a passport to survival. Behind you, an elderly man mutters arithmetic under his breath, counting family members against the week's allotment. Someone further down coughs. And just like that, order forms organically, one behind the other, an accidental choreography learned by instinct, not instruction. Your boots slip slightly on the icy pavement. You shift your weight, rubbing your hands together, watching snow swirl down through the faint orange glow of the street lamp. The air smells of diesel, yeast, and resignation. A young boy scurries past with a loaf under his arm, his grin wide and loud in this otherwise quiet morning. The people in line watch him in grim admiration like he's a war hero returning from the front. A mainstream fact for your sleepy mind. Under the Soviet ration system, items like meat, sugar, coffee, and butter were heavily restricted during shortages, especially in the post-war years. Every citizen carried a ration card as kartakka that determined how much of what they could buy. It turned daily shopping into an endurance sport. You glance at the shop's grimy window. Inside, loaves of bread stand like trophies, each dusted faintly with flour. The clerk moves slowly, as if mistrusting her own abundance. Time drips like honey here, thick, deliberate, almost mocking. The woman ahead adjusts her scarf again and tells you she's been waiting since dawn. You nod sympathetically and join the shared misery of small talk. The weather, the rumor of a new flour shipment, the way the queue feels shorter this week. Everyone knows these conversations are more about solidarity than information. There was even a saying back then, you get to know your neighbors only in line. Sometimes friendships formed, marriages even. And sometimes, of course, fists flew over a loaf that someone claimed twice. Historians still argue whether the queue culture numbed people to collective inefficiency or helped them form bonds strong enough to keep the nation from splintering earlier. The quirky detail for tonight: it was common for people to hire stoiki, professional line standers. Usually retirees or students, they'd hold your place for hours for a small fee or a pack of cigarettes. You picture yourself outsourcing your waiting like some 1950s Deliveroo order for bread. Efficiency by endurance outsourcing. Very Soviet, very ironic. The queue shuffles forward an inch. Someone sighs theatrically. A radio from an open window above plays a scratchy jazz tune. The kind still allowed, the kind without too much swing. You glance up at the sky, dull gray sliding toward morning. Somewhere, the city's loudspeakers burst to life again, celebrating a new tractor production record in Uzbekistan. You imagine the tractors, gleaming, glorious, entirely irrelevant to your current situation. As the clock strikes 9, the first wave of impatience rises. The shopkeeper announces a temporary pause. "Bread only! No butter until noon!" Groans ripple through the line like ripples along a pond. But no one leaves. You wouldn't dare. Abandoning your place means forfeiting hours of your life and possibly tonight's dinner. The unwritten rule of Soviet life: never leave your queue. It's like a forbidden marriage vow between you and bureaucracy. You stamp your feet to keep warm. The old man behind you suddenly chuckles, a soft, dry laugh. You ask why, and he replies, "When I was young, we stood for freedom. Now, I stand for bread. Maybe freedom was easier." That's your first joke of the day, accidental but resonant. You almost laugh too, but a guard passes by, and both of you go silent. After what feels like a geological epoch, movement returns. You reach the counter. The clerk barely looks up. You present your ration coupons, and she stamps each with the slow authority of someone who could, with one wrong stroke, erase your week's worth of meals. 2 loaves of rye bread, dense and still warm. Their crusts crackle faintly under your mittened hands. You catch yourself smiling. Victory smells like yeast and ash. On your way home, a group of children run past dragging sleds made from wood scraps. They're laughing, faces red from the cold. You clutch the bread to your chest protectively, but the sound of their joy lingers after they've gone. Maybe that's how people survive here. Not through certainty, but through the flashes of warmth that leak through the cracks of rationing and routine. Back in your communal kitchen, the neighbors gather around the table, eyeing your bundle like a sacred artifact. You slice the first loaf, steam rising, releasing its modest miracle of sweetness. 3 bites in, someone makes a joke about Pravda being thicker than the bread last week. A ripple of laughter breaks across the group. The old lady Clara leans in, whispering that oranges might arrive at the Central Market tomorrow. You all know it's probably not true, but it's a beautiful rumor worth keeping. You tilt your head toward the frosted window, where the city hums faintly beyond the glass. The trams rattle, the smokestacks cough, and the clock ticks on. A metronome for survival. You tear another piece of bread and chew slowly. It tastes simple, earthy, grounding. You could almost believe this is what stability feels like. Like many things here, it's both a comfort and a method of control. Warm enough to keep you loyal, heavy enough to keep you from running. Later, as you lie in your narrow bed, listening to the distant murmurs of another late-night kitchen debate, you realize the queue wasn't just waiting. It was life itself, unordered, stubborn, full of strangers that somehow became your reflection. Tomorrow will bring another line for sugar, maybe for soap, maybe for stories. But for now, your stomach is warm, your hands smell of bread, and your heart, against all odds, still hums with quiet pride. The gray morning swells again, sliced by the whistle of a factory siren. You wake with that sound in your bones. It's as familiar as your own heartbeat now. Today isn't about standing in line or boiling kasha. Today, you work. The factory gates stand like iron jaws on the edge of the city, swallowing citizens by the thousands. You're one of them, shuffled along in the tide of workers wrapped in thick coats and thicker silence. Steam rises from the ground grates, carrying that metallic scent of oil and sweat you've grown to love and resin in equal measure. Somewhere ahead, a foreman barks at late arrivals, his breath visible in the pale air. You check your watch, a cheap Belarus model, and pick up your pace. You can't afford another mark for tardiness. Those warnings collect faster than sugar coupons. When the main gate looms into view, it looks less like a workplace and more like a temple to industry. Enormous red letters across the facade read labor is the honor of the citizen, a slogan painted so long ago that the paint's flaking like old ideology. You flash your work card, nod to the guard, and step into the mechanical heartbeat of the Soviet economy. Inside, it's a world of motion and noise. The floors tremble with the rhythm of machines compacting steel into something purposefully vague. Parts for tractors, maybe rockets, maybe both. It doesn't matter. You're told what to make, not what it makes. The air hangs heavy with oil vapors, dust, and the warmed breath of hundreds of workers packed shoulder to shoulder. Moss green uniforms blend into the smear of smoke and fluorescent light. You tie a scarf over your mouth, adjust your gloves, and step into the rhythm. For 8, maybe 10 hours, you'll feed sheets of metal into a press the size of a city bus. The machine shudders with every hit, dwarfing your efforts and reminding you how small you are in the hierarchy of production. Sparks spit across the floor like fireflies. The heat stings even through layers. A coworker named Ania wipes her brow beside you, muttering, "At least it's warmer in here than outside." You grin. We take our blessings where we can. Your foreman, Boris, marches past, nodding approval. 100% quota met, 5% over target. Glorious productivity! You can almost hear that phrase echoed later in the evening radio broadcast. A mainstream historical fact hums behind the din. In the 1950s and 1960s, factory work was the backbone of Soviet life. Millions labored under the Stakhanovite ideal, named for miner Alexei Stakhanov, who allegedly mined 14 times his quota in a single shift. Reality didn't matter so much as the myth. Stories of heroic overachievers kept morale alive, or at least loud. You get a short lunch break, which is generous by local standards. The canteen smells equal parts comforting and tragic soup, sweat, and yesterday's bread reheated until it could double as insulation. You find a spot on a splintered bench beside Ania and a young man named Sergei, who speaks only in sports metaphors. We're midfielders in the game of socialism. He says, spoon suspended midair. You nod, not quite sure what team you're on. The soup tastes of boiled mystery and faintly of dill. Still, it's something warm to wrap your hands around before diving back into the mechanical roar. Above your heads, portraits of Lenin, Gagarin, and a few smiling local production heroes beam down in idealized perpetuity, faces scrubbed clean of fatigue, untouched by oil or error. For a second, you imagine your own portrait hanging there someday. But the thought feels absurd. Your fingernails are black, your back aches, and your dreams, like the enamel mugs, have chips that will never mend. Back at the assembly line, a rumor floats through the noise someone's machine broke again. Everyone pretends not to hear. Another rumor says the director's nephew got promoted to supervisor despite never sweating in his life. That one earns a bitter chuckle or two. Laughter in factories is currency, rare, risky, and worth its weight in vodka. When the factory siren wails again at sunset, you nearly stumble from relief. You peel off your gloves, flexing numb fingers stiff from constant vibration. Outside, the world greets you not with rest, but with dusk soaked in exhaust and thawing snow. Workers stream out, trudging home like soldiers after a battle no one noticed. The sidewalks shimmer with patches of black ice and cigarette ends glowing like tiny rebellions. You pass a billboard showing a smiling worker holding a gleaming spanner, eyes fixed toward a bright socialist sunrise. The slogan reads, "Tomorrow works because you do today." You smirk, one of those sly, exhausted smiles that hides both pride and mockery. Historians still argue whether such propaganda motivated or merely exhausted the Soviet people. Probably both. Every new slogan added another layer of irony over the steel skeleton of the state. There's a quirky tidbit the official story never emphasizes. Many workers secretly personalize their machines. Little good luck tokens tucked near controls, a matchbox photo of a family, a toy, a small Lenin pin turned backward as private rebellion. You taped a tiny paper bird to your workstation months ago. It's still there, blackened now with soot, but somehow still fluttering when the wind sneaks through the vents. When you reach the tram stop, the city hums with its peculiar twilight life. You find a spot wedged between two pensioners comparing grocery prices. The tram groans forward, headlights slicing through faint fog. Outside the window, you see rows of identical apartment blocks passing like gray dominoes. Somewhere in one of them, a radio plays a familiar tune, a rousing anthem about unity work and the shining path to progress. You almost hum along, almost. By the time you're home, your body hums with exhaustion that feels ancestral. You set your boots by the door, hang your coat, and breathe in that shared apartment scent again. Boiled cabbage and humanity. Anya's laugh echoes faintly in your mind. Even in the drudgery, there's connection, fleeting but real. You pour hot water over a smuggled tea leaf, the steam rising in lazy spirals like hope itself. A neighbor pokes her head in to complain about noise, then stays to share one sugar cube. You both sip slowly, hands warming. The conversation drifts to harmless things, a popular radio drama, a rumor of better boots arriving from Leningrad. Outside, the city glows faintly under its blanket of snow, factory smoke curling like phantom lace against the moon. This day, like every day, feels both eternal and fragile, an infinite loop powered by human endurance and faint defiance. Sleep comes easily when you've worked yourself into dust. Dreams come harder, but they still come, fluttering like your soot-covered paper bird. Tomorrow, the siren will call again, and you'll answer? Because everyone does. The morning whistles not from a factory this time, but from the thin breath of a child blowing into a cracked recorder. You blink awake to see the little one in a tiny red scarf, practicing for tomorrow's Young Pioneers meeting. The sound is both hopeful and slightly painful, the way every idealism starts out. You smile sleepily, it's sweet, even if it's shrill. The Young Pioneers. Maybe you remember when you first tied that bright scarf around your neck, the fabric stiff and proud, the smell of starch and pride mingling together. Every child, by a certain age, joined. It wasn't really optional, more a rite of passage, like losing a tooth, except this time you lost individuality. The motto that echoed everywhere, always ready. Ready for what? Nobody entirely explained. Adventure, perhaps, or the construction of a future that always shimmered just past the horizon. You lace up your shoes and head out to the local schoolyard. Flags of deep red whip sharply in the crisp air, and a cluster of children stands in perfect rows, their breath forming synchronized clouds. Their leader, a teen barely older than them, shouts slogans with a voice full of ceremony and cracked adolescence. You feel both nostalgic and mildly concerned. It's too early in the morning for so much fervor. The historical fact behind the cheer, founded in 1922, the Young Pioneers organization was the child version of Communist Party membership. By the 1950s, nearly every Soviet child belonged, from Arctic towns to desert collectives. Its purpose: to mold a generation into model citizens devoted to labor, unity, and eternal optimism. Officially, it was about morals and community. Unofficially, it was also the state's favorite early loyalty program. You watch as the children raise their arms in salute. Not stiff, but reverent, fingertips brushing the brims of caps. Their red scarves catch the sunlight, glowing like little flames. There's something touching about it. The bravado of innocence, the pride unspoiled by contradiction. Still, somewhere deep inside, you remember the flutter in your own chest, the first time you realized that questions were not rewards here. They were red flags of the wrong kind. The pioneer leader invites everyone to chant. Their voices overlap in high, pitched enthusiasm that somehow makes you proud and sad in equal measure. The sound feels clean, but you know what's underneath the design fine? Tuned by ideology. Historians still argue whether the young pioneers genuinely taught valuable social unity or simply trained children to shout in unison before they'd learned to whisper for themselves. After the ceremony comes playtime. You trail after them as they launch into a snowball fight that quickly devolves into laughter and mock heroics. One boy declares himself commander of the Lenin Battalion and builds a snow fortress shaped vaguely like a Kremlin tower. Another pretends to be a capitalist invader armed with an umbrella. Within minutes, Marxist snowballs are flying. You duck instinctively, laughing despite yourself. Childhood has a way of seeping through even the thickest ideology. Inside the adjoining school building, lessons begin. You slip into a corner desk at the back. No one minds. Visitors are just part of the social tapestry. The classroom smells of chalk, wet wool, and determination. Lenin's portrait hangs above the blackboard, watching benevolently as the teacher, a woman with kind eyes and sharp voice, writes hard work makes a better world. She underlines it twice. The children recite multiplication tables, read from arithmetic primers, illustrated with cheerful tractors and brave young miners. When the teacher asks who built the new irrigation canal, every hand shoots up in unison.
The laborers of the motherland!
They beam with sincerity too pure to mock. You can't help but admire their energy. Belief that burns bright because it hasn't yet met the wind. For a moment, a quirky tidbit slips into your thoughts. Many Soviet children collected self-improvement, badges for everything. Reading a certain number of pages, cleaning a park bench, or raising rabbits. The rabbit craze, in fact, led to entire backyards filled with pet projects that hopped their way into local kitchens by winter. Good citizenship met practical nutrition. Efficiency, you suppose. During recess, you wander back outside. The snow crunches pleasantly beneath your boots, and laughter echoes between the buildings. A girl with pigtails offers you a piece of candy, the kind wrapped in shiny foil depicting a bear in space. It tastes faintly of mint and something chemical. You thank her anyway. Generosity feels sacred when it costs so much. The bell rings again, and the children line up neatly. They file back into warmth, scarves tucked, gloves mismatched. One boy lingers a moment to wave at you. His smile carries that undefeated faith that the future is theirs. You wave back, wondering if he'll keep that spark when the world starts demanding more silence than shouting. Evening settles slow and blue over the city. You pass a corner shop where a painted poster shows a happy pioneer girl watering a plant beneath the slogan "Grow Strong! Grow Soviet!" You can almost hear her humming. The street smells of coal and pie crust. A woman sells roasted seeds from a cart. Life feels smaller today, but sweeter, too. At home, you tuck yourself under your blanket, the sound of distant laughter still buzzing in your ears. You think of the children saluting, the little red scarves like embers against the snow. Maybe they'll grow up to question everything, or maybe they'll build more factories and satellites with unshakable belief. You hope for both, the idealism to dream and the freedom to doubt. As sleep creeps in, you hear that recorder again somewhere down the hall, still off key but determined. You smile in the dark. Some things, like childhood and off-key optimism, deserve to survive their own propaganda. The morning bell at the school clangs with an authority that makes you straighten your back, even before you remember where you are. The corridors smell like chalk and boiled paper, the uniquely Soviet scent of education. You follow the tide of children streaming inside, boots squeaking on the linoleum, scarves unraveling as they dash to hang their coats. Somewhere, a caretaker shouts, "Don't run!" And 300 children accelerate immediately. Your seat waits at the wooden desk, initials carved carefully into its surface, gum hardened beneath, and a thin notebook resting on top like fresh snow on an old roof. The teacher, tall, stern, and draped in gray wool, writes a quote on the blackboard in crisp Cyrillic. Study, study, and study again. V.I. Lenin. The chalk squeals against the board, a kind of national alarm clock. You pull out your stubby pencil and prepare to copy the line for what feels like the 1000th time. Somewhere in the room, a boy sneezes. The whole class echoes, "Be healthy," because even here, politeness is a team sport. The teacher smiles briefly, then her face returns to official mode, and the lesson about revolutionary heroes begins. She tells the story of Pavlik Morozov, the boy who supposedly reported his father to the authorities and became a martyr of state loyalty. You shift in your seat, uncomfortable. Even as a child, the tale has a chill to it. Family loyalty sacrificed for ideology. Historians still argue whether Pavlik was real or cleverly invented propaganda, but in this classroom, there's no doubt at all. His portrait hangs on the wall. His eyes seem to follow you, earnest and not entirely kind. She moves on to arithmetic. Numbers always safer territory. Columns of sums march in straight lines across the blackboard, their order comforting compared to politics. You're good at math. It's practical and predictable, two qualities in short supply elsewhere. As you work through the problems, you catch fragments of conversation from the back row. Someone whispers about an older brother getting a scholarship to study physics in Leningrad. Another mutters that his family can't afford the travel. Whispering in school is half rebellion, half survival training. The clock ticks loudly, each second punctuating the expected silence. The teacher walks between rows, the click of her shoes like punctuation marks. When she stops beside you, you feel her shadow before her voice. "Comrade," she says lightly, "your handwriting is almost bourgeois. Make your letters uniform." You nod obediently, though you smile inside. That's 2 jokes for today, unintentional and delightful. At break, you hurry to the hall, where the smell of cabbage pastry and toothpaste linger. Children trade pins and colored erasers. Treasures smuggled through family connections. The most coveted prize is a shiny Western gum wrapper someone's cousin brought back from Hungary. It's glossy, it smells faintly of strawberries, and 4 children are willing to barter stamp collections for it. You watch the small transaction unfold with awe. In this world, chewing gum wrappers might as well be gold. A quirky truth now: to earn extra money, some older students literally ironed out and resold those same wrappers, creating small black market economies of color and scent. Even garbage could glitter when the world lacked sparkle. Afternoon lessons are quieter. History next. You sit through a recitation of great leaders and their triumphs, and every word lands heavy with familiarity. The textbook illustrations look staged, each battle drawn like a parade. Still, when the teacher tells of victory over fascism, pride wells even now. You can feel the inherited weight of sacrifice, the way every family has a ghost who never came home. Outside, snow begins to drift again, visible through the smudged window panes. A girl across the aisle catches you staring and grins, carving shapes in her textbook margin. A tiny rocket, a dog, a crooked heart. Her nails are ink-stained. Your stomach flutters. Then the teacher clears her throat, and you snap your eyes forward as the blush betrays you. Romance, like descent, requires stealth here. Later, in the hallway, posters glare down in solemn red and gold. The future belongs to those who study the present. You think about that as you pull on your coat. What does present even mean when it's dictated before it happens? The question sticks even as you step outside into the brittle white of afternoon. You walk home with 2 classmates. One talks nonstop about becoming an engineer, another dreams of space. You play along, tossing snowballs into the air, each landing marking an imagined planet. The air tastes faintly of metal, tram wires singing somewhere in the distance. When you return to the communal flat, the hallway buzzes as usual. A neighbor's son practices the accordion, hitting one bad note on eternal repeat. You unpack your school bag notebook's crumbs, and that precious gum wrapper slipped to you when no one was looking. You flatten it smooth on the windowsill. It catches the dim kitchen light and flickers like a secret star. Homework later drags on. The history questions are predictable. Who inspired the workers to greater achievements? What does patriotism mean to youth? You could answer them in your sleep. Still, as you write, a flicker of rebellion curls at the edges of your mind. Maybe patriotism also means wanting your country to tell the truth. Maybe that's okay to think, as long as you don't say it. Your mother calls from the kitchen, announcing tea ready. The sweet smell of burnt sugar fills the air. You close your notebook, tuck the gum wrapper inside as a bookmark, and join her. She asks how school was. You tell her it was good. That single word, as always, carries layers she doesn't unpack aloud. She nods, satisfied, and fetches 2 chipped cups. The radiator hisses softly. Outside, the wind rises, brushing the window with snowflakes that melt before you can count them. You sip your tea and stare at your reflection in the glass. A face halfway between child and citizen. Somewhere between truth and the lessons written in chalk. And somewhere, miles away yet right next door, a city full of identical students sits at identical desks under identical portraits, all dreaming differently even when told to dream the same. Night settles thickly over the city, but inside your communal kitchen the lights still burn, yellow and humming. The dinner dishes have been washed, mostly, and now the adults, those who've survived another workday, linger near the table longer than usual. There's something different in the air tonight. The tone of voice is lowered just enough to make you listen. Someone produces a small record. Jazz, forbidden but loved. The sleeve is faded, edges crumbling from too many secret plays. You place the vinyl on the gramophone, your heart hammering like you're about to smuggle state secrets rather than music. A scratch, then a trumpet sighs, lazy and alive. The sound fills the room softly, like warmth finding its way under the door. Welcome to the kitchen conversation, the other half of Soviet social life, the real classroom, the second parliament, the safer church. Here, between the hum of radiator pipes and the clatter of spoons, people whisper what they actually think. Truth hides best in steam and laughter. Your neighbor Victor starts the conversation cautiously. You hear? He says, voice dipped in static, that the Americans landed another plane on that aircraft carrier thing. Imagine having ships large enough for planes. Everyone chuckles, but it's nervous humor. Politics in the open is everyone's favorite invisible friend. It sits at the table even when uninvited. Technically, gatherings of this sort aren't illegal. Talking isn't illegal. Thinking loudly, however, can be. There's an invisible line, somewhere between complaint and sedition, and everyone learns to sense it. It lives in the twitch of an eyebrow, the whisper that dips just before the name. Stalin leaves a mouth. A mainstream fact fits quietly here at the height of Stalin's rule. Nearly 1 Soviet citizen in 10 was said to have been reported, truthfully or falsely, for anti-Soviet sentiment. By the 1950s, denunciation was an old reflex, a kind of civic muscle memory. You never quite forget it, even decades later. You stir your tea while the record turns, the saxophone rolling like a sleepy apology across the room. The chatter drifts from jazz to bread prices to why the neighbor upstairs definitely hides meat under her bed before inspectors come. Then Victor leans in again. They say there's a book you can't find anymore, something by Pasternak. But a friend's cousin copied it by hand. You know what that means, samizdat, self-published, passed secretly, 1 typewriter carbon sheet at a time. It's the underground library, spreading ideas like contraband warmth. The government calls it subversive, readers call it oxygen. A woman across the table, Clara, yes, the same formidable hallway sentinel, sniffs disapprovingly. Books get people arrested, she murmurs. Then, after a pause, adds, But if you find it, let me borrow it first. That earns the night's best laugh. The record spins another soft loop. A quirky bit of history. Some people disguised banned manuscripts as cookbooks or gardening guides. You could be nurturing tomatoes or treason, depending on the page you opened. Imagine flipping past how to make pickled beets and landing on forbidden poetry. It gives home economics a different thrill, but even laughter here carries weight. If the walls could speak, they'd whisper names and stories of those who trusted too loudly. The KGB rumor, after all, isn't superstition, it's architecture. Microphones in light fixtures, reports typed in basement offices. Most apartments aren't actually bugged, but it only takes one, that is, to make everyone else whisper. Historians still argue whether people truly lived in constant fear or merely adapted through layers of irony, learning when to nod and when to look away. Either way, it shaped a nation fluent in half-truths, jokes, and knowing glances. Irony became the mother tongue of the kitchen. As the evening thickens, someone opens the window a crack to vent the smoke. Outside, snow falls steadily, blanketing rooftops in silent rhythm. Inside, your group huddles closer, voices dropping with every topic drift: cinema, shortages, rumors of a thaw in censorship. Hope flutters timidly among the cigarette curls. Maybe next year. Someone says, "We'll hear jazz on the radio officially." You laugh softly. It's a comforting fantasy. The idea that freedom might one day come scheduled between weather updates and crop reports. Eventually, the record ends. The gramophone clicks off, a small, polite ending. You don't replace it. The silence feels heavier now, richer somehow. People sip the last of their tea, reluctant to break the spell with goodbyes. You all know there's danger in closeness, but danger, like hunger, is easier to share than to bear alone. Someone mentions the old toast, to those not here. Glasses clink softly. Tea, vodka, it doesn't matter. Every clink is both memory and prayer. You find yourself studying the steam curling from the kettle, hypnotic in its slow dance. For a moment, you think how strange it is, how an empire can control production, newspapers, even the calendar, but not the way steam rises. No amount of vigilance makes it behave. Later, in bed, the walls seem thinner, as if still carrying the voices from earlier. The smell of tobacco clings to your coat, the faint rhythm of jazz lingers in memory. You close your eyes and picture the kitchen again. The glow of yellow light, the quiet laughter, the dangerous kindness of shared thought. Sleep drifts near. Outside, the wind hums against your window, steady as a metronome. You imagine it carrying away your whispered conversations to wherever truth waits, preserved in the cold. And maybe someday, when people remember these years, they'll think of that warmth, how history, like jazz, always survives improvisation. Morning sunlight hits your face like a spotlight you didn't ask for. Outside your window, the street hums louder than usual, voices carrying through frosty air. You can tell even before you step out, it's parade day. Somewhere not far away, drums are warming up, boots thudding in rehearsal. On mornings like this, the entire city feels drafted into theater. You pull on your best coat, the one with the missing button that you pretend not to notice, and head toward Red Square, or whatever local parade ground your city claims as its stage. The tram is crowded, of course. Everyone's heading the same way: soldiers, schoolchildren in neat uniforms, office clerks trying to look enthusiastic. Flags poke out from under winter coats like crimson feathers. Babies wave them instinctively, already knowing the choreography of patriotism. When you emerge from the station, the crowd's a living tide. Music blares from tinny loudspeakers. Marches stitched together by static and fanfare. You spot giant portraits propped on layers of scaffolding: Lenin, Marx, and the current array of smiling party leaders frozen mid-inspiration. They all stare upward at futures that never quite arrive. The streets are swept spotless. Red banners ripple against a pale sky, and people stand shoulder to shoulder, pressed so close you can feel the heartbeat of the nation through your boots. The air smells of diesel fumes and roasted nuts from a vendor who's definitely not supposed to be there, but understands that revolution and commerce share a survival instinct. You edge into position, only a few rows from the barricades. Soldiers in gleaming uniforms march past, their synchronized boots hitting the pavement like disciplined thunder. The sight is hypnotic. Hundreds of men moving as one, no hesitation, no individuality, just precision. You find yourself oddly moved, in spite of knowing this display is choreographed down to the millisecond. A mainstream fact surfaces in your thoughts. The annual parades on Red Square began in the 1910s, but reached their grandest scale during the Soviet era. Victory Day, May Day, Revolution Day, each became a symphony of military power and political messaging. Tanks would often rumble close enough to rattle window panes miles away. For citizens, it was both spectacle and reminder. Strength equals safety. Safety depends on silence. But there's humor under the solemnity. You hear a whisper behind you. Two students joking that one of the tanks last year broke down halfway down the street and needed to be discreetly hauled off while the orchestra vamped on. You stifle a laugh, pretending to cough. The irony of grand machinery undone by its own gears feels too fitting. Today's flyover drones overhead, the sound low and monstrous. Jet contrails etch white scars across the blue, and everyone gasps on cue. You tilt your face up, blinking into the glare. Beside you, a little boy salutes with fierce seriousness, his red scarf flapping. The pride in his eyes is blinding, pure, and a small part of you envies it. Then come the workers' collectives, the civil section of the parade. They march under banners announcing record harvests and heroic production quotas. Each carries props tools, wheat sheaves, model turbines. Women in bright skirts wave bouquets of carnations, and men hold signs declaring 5-year plan completed ahead of schedule. You wonder what would happen if someone carried one reading. We're exhausted. Probably fireworks of the wrong kind. A quirky tidbit floats to mind in some smaller towns. People were required by their factories to attend, and those caught, absent without cause, risked losing holiday bonuses. Parade participation as performance review, there's efficiency for you. Still, as the brass band swells into another victory anthem, you recognize something genuine beneath the orchestrated cheer. The people are proud. Not necessarily of the men on the podium, but of themselves, of surviving another winter, another year of waiting, building, hoping. The applause that erupts isn't fully choreographed. It's too uneven, too human. Cameras flash near the reviewing stand. You crane your neck and spot the officials. Rows of dark coats and medals, faces unreadable behind forced smiles. The loudspeaker crackles, announcing speeches thick with adjectives heroic, glorious, unwavering. You try to listen, but your mind drifts to the marching rhythms around you, the way every drumbeat lands somewhere between command and comfort. After the formal procession, the crowd begins to loosen. Balloons appear, children laugh, and the scent of fried dough replaces diesel. A street accordionist sneaks a quick tune between patriotic songs, and for a moment, no one stops him. People even clap along gently. It's as if joy, long disguised as loyalty, finally peeks through the cracks. You follow the current of people toward the river embankment. Ice still floats sluggishly on the water, refracting glitter from stray bits of parade confetti. Beside you, a couple eats roasted corn and debates whether the space program will send a woman to orbit soon. Hope, like rumor, is best enjoyed in public. Historians still argue whether parades reinforced faith in the system or merely provided an emotional holiday from skepticism. Perhaps both. You stop at a stall selling cheap pins, miniature rockets, red stars, portraits of Gagarin. You buy one shaped like a golden hammer and pin it to your coat. It's heavy for its size, but you like how it gleams. Pride mixed with irony again, the national flavor. As the afternoon fades, the crowd disperses in a tide of chatter and tired feet. Workers head home with paper flags drooping, children clutching melted candy. The streets, littered now with confetti and trampled slogans, look almost ordinary again. You find yourself walking slower, replaying the music in your head. Later, back in your room, you hang the new pin above your desk. It catches the amber glow of your small lamp, throwing a shimmer on the wall that looks almost heavenly. You sit down, pour yourself tea, and smile faintly at the absurdity of it all. The pageantry, the pride, the propaganda, and the strange comfort that comes from belonging to something massive, even if imperfect. Outside, a faint echo of marching drifts on the wind, mixed with laughter and the crackle of fireworks miles away. You close your eyes and imagine you're up there on one of those tanks, waving to yourself in the crowd, a tiny soul in a huge, unstoppable theater. For a moment, both versions of you believe every word of the anthem, and that feels almost beautiful. Night fades into a pale chill, and you wake to static whispering from your radio. The announcer's voice sounds unusually excited. Something about space, about history being made beyond the sky. You turn up the volume, half expecting another political speech, but then you catch it. Comrade Yuri Gagarin has become the first man in space. You blink, unsure if you heard right. Space, a man. Not a rocket, not a satellite, but a person with a voice and heartbeat, orbiting somewhere above your cracked ceiling. You glance upward instinctively, as if you could spot him waving between the hanging laundry lines. Out the window, the city is already awake. People are running, calling, laughing. Someone bangs on your door, your neighbor Victor again, and bursts in breathless. "Did you hear?" he said. "I see the earth." He's grinning like a boy. He could see us. You can't help laughing. "What, from 200 kilometers up?" "Why not?" he replies. "He was looking for me." All day, the air hums with celebration. The local loudspeakers blast triumphant marches. Newspapers rush out special editions. Street vendors who couldn't find bread yesterday somehow find commemorative pins today. The gray sky itself feels brighter, as though inspired. You pull on your coat and join the crowd outside. People are clustered under banners, reading the bulletin boards where new headlines go up. Soviet Mankonku Eras Kosmos. It feels like humanity just punched a hole through heaven without asking permission. Everywhere you look, faces glow. Genuine joy, not the state-mandated kind. Shopkeepers lean out of their windows. One woman even waves a ladle like a flag.
"Glory to Gagarin!"
Someone shouts, and a spontaneous, messy sing-song chorus replies. Even cynics forget their skepticism for a few hours. This moment doesn't feel orchestrated. It feels earned. A factory worker wipes tears from his face. Students sketch little rockets in notebooks. In the bakery line. Yes, there's still a line. People share stories of what they were doing when they heard. It's a communal fairy tale unfolding in real time. A mainstream fact, April 12, 1961, marks the day Yuri Gagarin orbited the Earth aboard Vostok 1. His flight lasted 108 minutes, barely long enough for a movie, but it launched cosmic euphoria across the USSR. Statues would follow, songs, and eventually the annual Cosmonautics Day. But nothing would quite match the raw electricity of that morning. You wander toward the park, where children already build cardboard rockets, chanting, "Yura, Yura," in rhythm. Someone's pinned a hand-drawn portrait of him to a tree trunk. It's crooked, but you smile anyway. Heroes rarely arrive aligned. Later that afternoon, a spontaneous rally forms near the square. Loudspeakers blare his famous words, half muffled by cheers. "Let's go." The state could never have scripted joy this pure. For once, belief and propaganda align. Everyone wants this victory to be true because, for once, it lifts instead of crushes. Even the ever-stoic Clara unbends. She stands in her doorway, apron dusted with flour, muttering, "We sent a man up there. Imagine what's for dinner tonight," before disappearing proudly back into her kitchen. There's a quirky side note to this cosmic triumph. Stores immediately sold out of tinned condensed milk. Why? because legends spread that Gagarin drank it before launch. If condensed milk could send a man into orbit, then who were you to skip your dose of interstellar sweetness? As dusk falls, impromptu bonfires flare in courtyards and alleyways. People sing paeans and old wartime anthems retooled for the stars. Someone pops a bottle of cheap sparkling wine, declaring it space champagne. Laughter bounces off walls, echoing like radio waves returning home. You tilt your head back. The sky has shifted tone, streaked with the faint blush of sunset. Somewhere out there, a tiny capsule had completed one full orbit and landed, its pilot blinking against sunlight, smiling like he'd just shaken hands with infinity. You imagine Gagarin looking down at this city, the chimneys, the gray roofs, the endless lines, and feeling a mix of pride and melancholy. Maybe he saw potential more than perfection. Maybe that's what being first means, carrying the weight of everyone's hopes in your small, steel cocoon. Historians still argue whether the space race was genuine scientific ambition or propaganda theater meant to dazzle a weary populace. You suspect it was both, yet it hardly matters tonight. Inspiration, even state-sponsored, still feels like flight. Back home, your radio plays the anthem again, but this time you let it. The melody swells, thumping against your ribs. Victor knocks on the wall between your rooms, a Morse code kind of celebration, and you knock back twice. Outside, fireworks burst low and wide, too small to reach the stars but trying anyway. You sit by the window, cup in hand, staring at the faint slice of moon emerging from behind the clouds. You whisper, "Hey up there," just in case. Somewhere between the static of the cosmos and the steam of your tea, it feels like the future really did arrive for a moment. Clean, unbroken, and mercifully human. The city hums softer now, satisfied but spent. Gagarin's smile gleams from fresh posters hung crookedly on stairwells. Children chase one another down the hall pretending to be rockets, making whooshing sounds. You laugh quietly as they thud past your door. When you finally lie down, the floor creaks beneath you like the hull of some grounded ship still dreaming of flight. Sleep comes light, filled with stars and the echo of a single phrase looping in your head. I see the earth. You picture that view. Oceans like blue silk, clouds swirling over continents, and somewhere, beneath all that vastness, your own small room still glowing faintly. And for the first time in a long while, you fall asleep proud of where you are. By now, you've learned to listen differently, to the walls, the pipes, and the pauses between sentences. Some days, the silence in your apartment feels thicker than the wallpaper glue holding everything together. Other days, even your own thoughts sound too loud. That's how life begins to feel once you realize how many ears might be listening. It's evening. You're sitting by the window, writing a harmless letter to your cousin about ration cards and weather. Careful, unremarkable topics. The radio murmurs in the corner, the newsreader's voice so steady it barely counts as human. Then, midway through the broadcast, you hear it, that particular drop in his intonation when a piece of news comes wrapped in warning. Someone, somewhere, has been unmasked as an enemy of the people. Again. You freeze, pencil hovering above paper. You don't even know the man's name, but the message lands anyway. Remember your place. The true listener tonight isn't you, it's the state, leaning in like a neighbor who never sleeps. The feeling isn't paranoia if it's earned. A mainstream historical fact by the early Cold War years, the Soviet Union had built one of the most extensive domestic surveillance systems in modern history. Tens of thousands of KGB officers and informants monitored letters, phone calls, workplaces, and sometimes even classrooms. It wasn't always science fiction. Sometimes it was just your building's janitor who volunteered information for the greater good. You set the letter down, unfinished. Outside, snow drifts lazily across the courtyard, muffling footsteps. Someone's walking home, collar up, eyes down. The universal posture of citizenship under scrutiny. Knocking at the door startles you. Quick, sharp knocks. 3, then 2 more. It's only Victor holding a cup of tea. Electricity just flickered again, he says too casually. Thought I'd see if yours went out too? You know what he's really saying? Let's talk quietly. Just in case someone's listening through the radiator. You both sit by the stove, tea steaming between you. The hiss of the gas provides cover. Conversation is a soft bullet. Safe topics like sports slide gracefully into dangerous ones like politics, then pirouette back before disaster. Victor describes how his colleague got a mysterious visit after telling a joke about a local official. Jokes, he says, shaking his head, are for people with stomachs stronger than mine. That earns your first laughter of the evening, low and brief. It feels luxurious to laugh at all. Humor is rebellion in pajamas. There's an old joke, too old to be safe, too good not to repeat. A man walks into an empty shop. You have no meat again, he asks. No, the clerk replies. Or the store with no fish. The store across the street has no meat. Both of you laugh softly, just once. The sound bounces off the ceiling like a spark that immediately extinguishes. A quirky historical tidbit floats to mind apartment phones, often carried faint background clicks during conversations, a telltale clue of monitoring. People grew so used to it that some greeted the invisible eavesdropper outright. Good evening, comrade listener. Before continuing their calls, it was a strange ritual of humor and despair rolled into one. Victor eventually leaves, and the silence stretches long again. Somewhere in the hallway, Clara's radio repeats the same broadcast you heard earlier. You can almost recite it by heart now, the opening trumpet fanfare, the clipped rhythm of the announcer's sentences, the predictable cadence of optimism. Every pause feels deliberate, as though each syllable has passed inspection. You walk to the window, tug the curtain tighter. Across the courtyard, someone is smoking under a dim bulb. He looks up suddenly, catching your gaze. You both freeze. Just two silhouettes separated by glass, each wondering what the other sees. He flicks the cigarette away and vanishes into shadow. You breathe out slowly, realizing you've been holding it. Historians still argue whether surveillance truly ruled daily life or whether people simply internalized the fear until it ruled itself. Either way, the result's the same. You edit yourself constantly, even in thought. The mind learns to install its own sensors. You catch yourself wondering if thoughts themselves might buzz too loud someday, like faulty light fixtures revealing secrets. Years from now, Western movies will dramatize this feeling with trench coats and microphones behind paintings. But the real thing is quieter. Teaspoons scraping, radios whispering, letters read and resealed with surgical precision. The great weapon isn't violence, it's uncertainty. Still, life continues. Tomorrow you'll go to work, you'll wait in another line, maybe you'll even tell another joke. Because waiting and joking are survival forms, and even watched people must live. After all, who can spend forever whispering? Eventually, someone clears their throat, and speech returns. Defiant, small, human. You turn the radio off. The hum lingers for a heartbeat, like the ghost of observation. Then silence resumes, thick but oddly peaceful. Maybe they're listening, maybe they're not. Tonight, you don't care. You walk to the stove, pour yourself another cup of tea, and let the steam fog the window until no eyes, real or imagined, can see through. Before bed, you scribble a single line on a scrap of paper. Something you'd never risk mailing, something just for you. They can watch me, but they can't watch my dreams. You fold it neatly and tuck it inside a book of poetry between two pages that will never confess. Outside, wind rattles the drain pipes like loose thoughts refusing to be contained. Somewhere, a light bulb flickers off in the corridor, plunging another room into darkness, and you find yourself smiling faintly. Darkness can be frightening. It also makes everyone equal, listener and listened alike. You wake to sunlight instead of sirens, a small miracle in itself. For once, The day doesn't begin with factory horns or marching feet. Instead, the morning smells faintly of pine and sea salt. You're on holiday. Oh, that sacred stretch of time when even the state pauses long enough to let its citizens breathe. A Soviet holiday isn't luxury. It's entitlement wrapped in ideology. You've been granted 10 glorious days at one of the massive state-sanctioned resorts along the Black Sea, an exercise in rest and patriotism simultaneously. The train ride there was 9 hot, crowded hours of chatter, clinking glass jars, and snoring strangers. By the time you arrive in Sochi, you'd trade all of Lenin's collected works for a shower and a breeze. But then you see at the horizon shivering under sunlight, the smell of salt thick and sharp, palm trees fluttering like gossiping comrades. You drop your suitcase and laugh out loud. You've made it south for real. The resort spreads out like a concrete utopia. Long white buildings, banners fluttering with cheerful slogans, rest builds strength for labor. Everywhere you look are families in sandals, sun hats, and optimism. Bronze Lenin statues gleam under the tropical sun, confidently inspecting the swimming facilities. Inside your assigned guest house, everything feels sturdy in half, broken at once. The sheets are stiff, the fan wheezes, but there's a balcony overlooking the sea. You stand there a while, the air hot and generous against your face. Someone below plays an accordion. Laughter rolls up like smoke. You almost forget the queues and gray stairwells waiting back home. Breakfast calls you downstairs to the canteen fruits, sticky compote, cold omelets, and ever-familiar bread. You sit with strangers automatically friendly, the unspoken rule of Soviet vacations. Everyone here's a temporary comrade. You trade stories about factories, teaching posts, and ration lines as though they're funny memories, not everyday chores. Shared suffering, repackaged as communal nostalgia, tastes better in sunlight. A mainstream fact slips in with the sea breeze during the 1960s and 70s. The Black Sea coast hosted around 30 million Soviet tourists annually. Government-run sanatoria offered prescribed beach rest, mineral springs, or air therapy. Medical holiday meets ideological retreat. Doctors even issued treatment plans that included sunbathing hours and scheduled naps. You follow one such doctor's order to walk with joy along the promenade. It's a pleasingly absurd command, and you do it wholeheartedly. The boardwalk stretches wide and white. Vendors sell ice cream on sticks for a few kopecks, the air sticky with sugar. Children splash in waves, while parents hover protectively, yelling that they'll catch a cold from sunlight, a feat of logic uniquely Soviet. Farther along, a group of young people cluster around a portable record player blasting Western rock, technically frowned upon but tolerated in holiday zones. Someone in authority must have weighed the risk and decided rebellion sounds better with suntan lotion. You sit nearby, pretending to read a state magazine while humming along quietly. By noon, the heat weaves drowsiness into every motion. The sea is impossibly blue, almost suspiciously so, and when you wade in, it holds you gently. Salt stings your lips, gulls wheel overhead like disbelieving angels. Around you drift dozens of citizens floating on inner tubes, each sighing with collective contentment. The entire proletariat rocking in unison. You paddle toward shore, where an older woman with a headscarf yells that she found a jellyfish and plans to pickle it for study. You grin, that's 3 unintended jokes already. Even science bends to curiosity here. Later, during the scheduled cultural hour, everyone gathers under a canvas awning for organized fun. Sing-alongs, trivia about crop yields, and an impromptu poem contest. A man recites verses comparing socialism to the Black Sea's eternal horizon. You clap politely while thinking that the sea, at least, doesn't require committee approval. A quirky tidbit some Soviet resorts, particularly in Crimea, ran friendship evenings, devoted to pairing singles. State-sanctioned matchmaking advertised as patriotic duty. Produce children, strengthen the motherland. Even the moonlit strolls came with paperwork. In the evening, The boardwalk glows orange with lanterns. An impromptu dance begins near the pier. Someone's borrowed an accordion again, the notes wobbling but joyous. You dance too, bare feet on warm boards, laughing as strangers spin you around. The night air smells of salt vodka and coconut oil smuggled from Bulgaria. For one rare stretch of hours, life feels weightless. The laughter's too unguarded to be rehearsed. The sea keeps breathing steadily beside you, rhythmic and forgiving. You think, so this is what happiness might sound like waves collapsing rather than slogans echoing. Historians still argue whether Soviet vacations were clever propaganda or genuine public welfare, whether giving citizens rest was generosity, strategy, or both. But standing here, hair dripping, heart steady, you stop caring about the debate. Whatever it was, it worked, for a week anyway. Back in your room, the fan hums endlessly, warm air swirling the smell of salt and sunburned skin. You lean on the balcony rail and watch the lights shimmer over the dark water. Tomorrow's agenda lists, mandatory walk at sunrise, and film screening, steel hopes of the motherland. You intend to skip both and sleep on the beach instead. The night deepens into velvet. Crickets chirp indifferently to ideology. Somewhere down the path, a final chorus of laughter trails off into silence, like surf pulling back from shore. You close your eyes, imagining the entire empire asleep beside the same sea, millions breathing in sync, dreaming perhaps of a different kind of freedom that smells like salt and sunscreen. You fall asleep to the sound of the tide tapping gently against the rocks, whispering secrets too ancient for surveillance, too vast for slogans. When you return from the seaside, your skin still smells faintly of salt, but the city wastes no time reminding you who's in charge. At the train station, the loudspeakers welcome you back to duty with a burst of patriotic music, tinny enough to peel paint. You smile quietly. Fits, doesn't it? Vacation's over, dream concluded. Time to be useful again. It's autumn now, moody and gray. Leaves collect in gutters, and the air carries that chalky tang of boiler smoke mixing with rain. You hurry down the street past posters announcing the new film lineup at the local cinema at dawn. Over the step, Iron Youth, the party's heart. The titles alone feel confident enough to march unaided. But culture, real culture, the restless kind, always finds its cracks. Tonight, you're following one of those cracks to a small, smoky theater tucked between two government buildings. The posters outside promise proved performances. Yet everyone knows this troupe slips in satire just mild enough to survive censorship and just sharp enough to matter. Inside, seats creak as people shuffle discreetly. The lights dim. On stage, instead of tractors or soldiers, 3 actors in simple costumes begin a play about plumbers fixing a mythical city's water pipes. Obviously a metaphor for bureaucracy, though no one says it aloud. Each line lands with a double meaning, and the silence after every joke feels charged, testing the air before laughter dares to exist. By the time the last curtain falls, the applause thunders. You clap until your hands sting, part gratitude, part relief. Art, even state approved, still breathes. Walking home, you pass through the cultural square where statues loom like slow ideas. You imagine the marble Lenin listening to whispers of poetry in the night breeze. Maybe he smiles, maybe he scowls, hard to tell. Next day after work, a friend mentions an exhibition in someone's apartment. You know that word means something different behind closed doors. You show up that evening with a bottle of mineral water as your ticket of entry. Inside, the small living room glows beneath a single bulb. Paintings lean against the walls, abstract, defiant, alive with colors that practically hum. A young painter you've never met gestures shyly at her work. This one, she says, is called Noise I Can't Say Out Loud. Everyone nods. The phrase alone feels dangerous, intoxicating, a mainstream fact to anchor the moment. By the 1960s and 70s, unofficial art scenes flourished in Leningrad and Moscow's hidden corners. The state promoted socialist realism, realistic depictions of healthy, productive life. But a quiet army of painters, poets, and musicians created their own semi-legal networks, dubbed the nonconformist or underground movement. These private showings, often called apartment exhibitions, could make or break a career or a reputation. You stare at one piece, a field of blue intersected by crooked black lines. It shouldn't make sense, but somehow it does. It looks like everything you've never said. Someone leans close, whispering, careful. They call that formalism. You whisper back, then I guess I'm a formalist tonight. That's your first joke, brushed in art, school sarcasm. Later, the host puts on a reel of music recorded from an obscure jazz band, rumored to play in a hotel basement once a month. The saxophone wails like a hidden soul. The group exchanges smiles, half grin, half grimace. Each note an act of aesthetic smuggling. There's beauty in breaking silence politely. A quirky tidbit at state concerts, musicians often slipped Western melodies into patriotic medleys, disguising jazz riffs under layers of accordion. A little forbidden syncopation hiding in a march. Music's version of a wink. Even the strictest censors sometimes tapped their feet before remembering not to. You think about the official art displayed in public squares. Workers holding hammers, mothers guiding children toward shining suns. And compare it to this. Shaky brushstrokes, raw harmonies, self-taught daring. One is carved from obedience, the other from hunger. Which one feels more alive? Historians still argue whether Soviet cultural limits strangled genius or simply redirected it. Constraint, after all, can sharpen creativity. Maybe rebellion thrives best when it isn't easy. You imagine the artists decades from now, their names whispered in restored freedom, their colors finally dry. As the evening wanes, people drift out in pairs, whispering goodbyes in the stairwell. You linger, eyes fixed on that blue painting again, tracing the black lines like escape routes. The painter catches you looking. "What do you see?" she asks. You hesitate, then murmur, "Hope, maybe, but tilted." She laughs softly. That's the correct angle. Outside, streets glisten under faint rain. Neon from a nearby cinema flickers across puddles, painting its own accidental art. You walk past the line of people queuing for the official film, watching the posters ripple in the wind. Inside, they'll cheer for the party's heart, sweat heroically under factory lights, and go home warmed by collective pride. Outside, you carry your own warmth secretly, small as a flame cupped in your palms. Back in your apartment, you lean against the cold radiator and close your eyes. The echo of a saxophone lingers in your head, stubborn as heartbeat. You picture that painter's hands, that color blue humming quietly on the canvas. Tomorrow, you'll go back to your job, your lines, your measured laughter. But tonight, you let your fingers tap the rhythm of that forbidden jazz on your windowsill. Art survived the winter, you think. So can you. You can feel the pulse of the city shift after payday. People walk faster, smiles flicker a little easier, and the kiosks suddenly have chocolates no one's seen in months. It's not that wages stretch far. Far is a luxury word. But money does what courage can't. It opens locked drawers for a day or two. You tuck your handful of rubles into a pocket and head to the market, not the official one with neat shelves and polite scarcity, but the other one? The nearby courtyard behind the tram depot, where the gray market hums quietly under watchful eyes. It's technically illegal, or at least discouraged. But so is wanting too much. The air smells of damp cardboard, cheap perfume, and opportunity. Women stand behind makeshift stalls, just planks on crates, selling handfuls of imported cigarettes, foreign coffee, colorful scarves that have clearly crossed borders, no customs officer admitted. Men linger with pockets full of connections. Nobody says, black market. That's too severe. They call it blat, the economy of favors, a system so natural it might as well be gravity. A mainstream historical fact. Blat, from Yiddish Polish roots meaning influence or cover, became a quiet backbone of Soviet life. When supply chains failed, relationships replaced them. You didn't buy things, you borrowed access. Fish through a railway clerk, medicine through a cousin in Minsk, real coffee through someone's friend who knows an embassy driver. Here, amid the whispers and bartering, you spot an older man offering contraband records, Western rock pressed onto old hospital x-rays. You pick one up. Through the faint ghostly ribs, you can see the spiral grooves glinting. Elvis, he mutters proud. Don't play it too loud. You smile. Music on bones. It's almost poetic how rebellion literally grows from someone's skeleton. A quirky tidbit, these homemade records were called Bones music or Ribs recordings. Smugglers from Leningrad to Warsaw used discarded X-rays to copy forbidden Western songs. Listeners could hear faint traces of both, heartbeat of rock and faint crackle of someone's fracture. You tuck the record into your coat and wander deeper into the labyrinth of goods. A woman selling fabric asks if you need stockings for a friend, her wink implying she doesn't believe they're for anyone but you. Another offers foreign deodorant, French, real, not Moscow knockoff. The price makes you laugh, 3 meals worth, but the idea of smelling like someone else's freedom is tempting. Later, at the vegetable table, you trade 2 ration coupons for cucumbers and a rumor. The seller says the store on Kirov Street got bananas, real bananas. You both laugh. The myth of the elusive banana resurfaces every few years, like a goldfish of hope. Historians still argue whether bananas truly reached all corners of the USSR or simply lived as edible propaganda. You head home clutching your small treasures, a roll of stockings, a jar of instant coffee smuggled from Finland, and of course, your X-ray record. The tram ride feels lighter than usual, humming like prosperity in motion. You catch your reflection in the glass, a little smug, a little weary, and think every empire eventually runs on favors, not fuel. At home, Clara's door opens before your key even clicks. Brought anything useful? She asks, suspicion mingled with curiosity. You hand her 1 cucumber and earn a rare smile. In the communal kitchen, barter isn't just economy, it's diplomacy. You brew the contraband coffee, the smell filling the corridor like an imported miracle. A neighbor pokes his head out. What's that smell? You shrug, optimism. The joke lands softly, but everyone grins. For one evening, the hallway smells like Paris instead of poverty. Later, you pull out the bone record. Your old gramophone hesitates but obliges. A burst of crackle, then a guitar riff so strange it almost feels illegal just to feel it. The rhythm is different. Reckless, unplanned, the opposite of factory schedules and public parades. Your foot taps before your mind catches up. Freedom doesn't need translation, it needs volume. You half expect someone to bang on the wall, but none do. Maybe sound this foreign hides itself, too alien for comprehension. You turn it up slightly, careful but bold. Somewhere in that raw, twanging voice, you hear defiance without consequences. When the song ends, you sit still, letting the silence after it sound like applause. Then you switch back to a state radio station, just to cleanse the air. It's broadcasting a cheerful report on increased tractor output, but all you hear is rhythm beneath monotony. Every word landing on the same beat, mechanical and steady. You sip the last of your coffee. It's bitter, rich, almost too good. Somehow it makes you more aware of what life could be if it didn't taste rationed. You wonder how many small revolutions hide in the simple act of sharing something rare. A cigarette, a secret, a song. The night grows deep and quiet. You hear footsteps outside, then nothing. You tuck the record away carefully, sliding it between state newspapers like hiding a heart inside propaganda. Historians will one day debate whether Blatt was corruption or survival. But for you, it's the art of staying human when systems forget you are one. The favor you give today might feed you next spring. Kindness, in this world, earns interest better than rubles. You blow out the small kitchen candle, savoring the last swirl of coffee scent in the air. Somewhere down the hall, You hear someone softly humming a Western tune, faint, uncertain, and instantly stifled when footsteps approach. You smile in the dark. The gray market, after all, isn't gray because it lacks color. It's gray because too many bright things prefer shadow to stay alive. The morning air tastes faintly of ashes and incense, a contradiction you've come to associate with the old parts of the city. You're walking a back street beyond the river, somewhere the maps forget on purpose. Here, between peeling facades and narrow courtyards, silence lives in the cracks. A church dome glimmers faintly at the end of the street, its gold leaf dulled by decades of disapproval. Faith is a ghost here, but a polite one. It pretends not to exist unless you acknowledge it first. You stop near the gates. They're half open, swung inward as if inviting only courage. An elderly woman with a scarf tied tight under her chin sweeps the steps. You nod, and she nods back, both of you pretending this is just another civic building. Inside, the air changes, musty, cold, alive with the nervous hush of hiding. Candles flicker along the altar like fragile defiances. A few people kneel, heads wrapped, shoulders hunched, each prayer whispered more like apology than declaration. A man near the front clutches a small icon polished smooth from years of nervous fingers. Nearby, a child stares up at a mural of angels, as if trying to confirm they're still allowed to fly. A mainstream fact by the 1960s, overt religious practice in the Soviet Union had largely been pushed underground. Churches were demolished, repurposed as warehouses or planetariums, and priests kept under surveillance. Yet belief didn't vanish, it migrated. To kitchens, to hearts, to small gestures disguised as habit. Historians still argue whether the USSR truly achieved atheism or simply forced faith into quieter forms. You light a candle, unsure whether for God or history. The wax drips slowly, its smoke twisting toward the ceiling before dissolving. The faint sound of an organ seeps through a cracked door at the back. Each note feels like someone remembering their own voice. You close your eyes, letting it vibrate in your ribs. The door slips open, and an old priest steps out, eyes gleaming in the half-light. "You're new here?" he says like a statement. You nod. "Not many young ones anymore." He sighs. "They've traded incense for cinema." He smiles. Gentle, not bitter. "Still, you're welcome. We are all loyal to something." That line sticks with you all day, loyal to something. It's both confession and shield. You leave a coin in the donation box, a quiet rebellion doubling as charity, and step back into daylight where slogans instead of saints decorate walls. On the corner stands what used to be another church, now reborn as the Museum of Scientific Triumph. Through the dusty windows, you spot glass cases filled with model tractors and space race posters. Irony doesn't even bother to disguise itself anymore. Walking home, you notice how symbols bleed into one another. The 5 pointed stars on banners echo the stars that crown old domes. The red of flags matches the flicker of votive flames. Everyone's still worshiping something, they just kneel differently. A quirky tidbit in some small towns, elderly women baptized babies secretly using teapots or kitchen basins, whispering prayers between kettle whistles. The children grew up thinking that steam was proof of miracles. Back in your apartment, you find your neighbor Clara humming an Orthodox hymn while stirring her soup. She stops when she catches your expression. "Just an old tune," she says tersely, but you can hear the candlelight in her voice. You join her at the table, neither of you mentioning where you've been. Evening deepens. Light bulbs buzz with that faint metallic note the faithful might mistake for chanting. The radio carries reports from the latest atheist conference, extolling reason and modernity. You listen absently. The language feels strangely familiar, the same cadence as prayer, just addressed upward to a different power. You remember the priest's words again, "We are all loyal to something." For him, loyalty meant the divine. For your supervisor at the factory, loyalty means production quotas. For you, It might mean the simple act of caring about anything that can't be measured. You reach for your tea glass, its warmth comforting against your fingers. Somewhere in the courtyard below, a man hums a folk song, melancholy, ancient. You recognize it from childhood, though the verses are incomplete. The melody winds upward through the dark, braiding with the faint smell of smoke from chimneys. Historians like to separate belief and disbelief, but to you, they've become the same shape. Two shadows leaning over the same candle. What survives most isn't dogma or doctrine, but rhythm. Kneel, rise, repeat, hope. Before bed, you open the small wooden box on your shelf. Inside is an old silver cross that used to belong to your grandmother. Its chain is broken, the clasp missing, but the metal feels warm, alive. You trace its outline with your thumb, imagining how many hidden palms have done the same gesture over decades. Then you wrap it gently in cloth and tuck it back away. Keeping it visible would be tempting fate. Keeping it hidden feels like telling the truth. Outside, the city sleeps under a thin mist. A church bell tolls faintly from far away, one single note swallowed by distance. For a moment, you can't tell whether it's real or memory. The sound fades, but your pulse keeps time with it, steady and small, echoing that same quiet defiance you felt by the altar. You whisper, not exactly a prayer, but close enough, keep something sacred, whatever it is. Then you drift off into sleep, dreamless but peaceful, as if the sky itself has agreed to keep your secret. Winter again, the kind that gnaws through leather boots and optimism alike. You wake to the sound of the radiator ticking in protest. It's working just enough to remind you what real warmth would feel like. Frost feathers the window glass, intricate as lace, but colder in its intentions. You rub a clear patch with your palm and stare out at the courtyard, now a gray-white tableau of survival. Children trudge towards school, their woolen scarves stiff with ice. A woman hauls a bucket of coal upstairs, leaving black fingerprints on the banister. Even the pigeons look reluctant to fly. You breathe out, watching your own breath ghost and vanish. Every Soviet winter is two battles at once, one against the weather, the other against running out of everything. Coal, potatoes, patience. The state promises efficiency, but the pipes don't read slogans. Somewhere, a radiator moans like a tired cello. You shuffle into the communal kitchen, where Clara stands wrapped in two shawls, stirring something ambitious that smells mostly like cabbage. She gives you a nod that says, "We've made it another morning." That's how victories are measured now. The window's frosted over from the inside. On its glass, someone's finger traced a crooked sun, maybe a child's small rebellion against meteorology. You pour tea, the color of weak amber but still hot, and coax a smile. A mainstream fact sighs in during severe Soviet winters, entire cities often rationed heating. Thermometers dropped below -20, while boilers flickered under poor fuel supply. Families slept in layers of sweaters and humor. The cold became folklore, a shared myth no one needed to exaggerate. In your hallway, pipes clang as if arguing. Someone upstairs bangs theirs with a wrench in reply. It's a symphony of the season. Metal groans, spluttering faucets, muffled curses. You join the chorus by stomping your feet, more to prove you're still here than to make any difference. You remember hearing that back in wartime. People used to put bricks in their beds to hold the heat. Someone else swears that placing thin salt packets in shoes keeps toes from freezing. Soviet survival isn't invention, it's stubborn poetry. Later, stepping outside, your eyelashes stiffen instantly. Snow lies thick over the cars, carving them into anonymous shapes. The wind doesn't dance, it lectures. Yet the city remains in motion. Women hurry along sidewalks carrying empty jars for milk. Men clutch briefcases filled with more air than paperwork. Trams crawl like beetles through snow fog. You stop by the kiosk for bread. The vendor, wrapped in fur down to her eyebrows, hands you a loaf so dense it could double as building material. You thank her anyway. Manners are their own insulation. She shrugs, saying, still better than last winter. You both know that's the national motto. A quirky tidbit in some regions, people lined their walls with newspaper to keep out drafts. Whole families literally lived inside headlines. When the ink rubbed off on skin, it left faint words across arms and cheeks, little print ghosts of propaganda turned body art. You imagine the reverse tattoos. Progress increases by 12%, scrawled across someone's forehead by accident. Back home, you carve the bread with effort. It resists, stubborn as everything else. The steam rising from the cut smells faintly of yeast and hope. You tear a piece, dunk it in salty butter, and chew slowly, grateful though your jaw protests. Outside, dusk arrives indecently early. Winter doesn't bother with transitions, it simply devours daylight whole. You light a candle even though the bulb still works. Shadows lengthen, stretching thin across chipped linoleum. In the soft flicker, the kitchen looks almost kind. You think how cold has its own strange democracy. No one can bribe it, and it doesn't care about rank. Factory directors and janitors alike wrap scarves the same way, clutching at warmth like contraband. Historians still argue whether hardship unified Soviet society or merely numbed it. Maybe both. When everyone's teeth chatter in rhythm, ideology hardly matters. You wrap yourself in a blanket and sit near the window again. Snow eddies upward briefly, defying gravity, before falling back down, resigned but graceful. Across the courtyard, you glimpse faint light behind another window. A family laughing around a radio, faces orange with lamplight. You can't hear them, but laughter transcends insulation. An hour later, the pipes emit one last shuddering sigh, and you know the hot water's done for the night. You fill your kettle quickly, stashing liquid warmth while you can. Survival becomes a game of timing. The only victory condition is enduring until spring. Before bed, you line your socks along the radiator's faint heat, knowing they'll dry halfway if you're lucky. You tuck another blanket over your shoulders, lie back, and watch frost reclaim the edges of your window. The patterns form silently. Ferns, stars, rivers, nature scribbling its own artistry where no censorship can reach. In that quiet moment, you realize the cold does something paradoxical. It makes every small mercy enormous. A cup of tea, a warm loaf, a working pipe. Each one feels like a revolution that succeeds daily. Maybe warmth itself is the most radical dream of all. You close your eyes, listening to the wind outside roar like an old engine stalled mid-promise. Your breath mingles with the night air leaking through the cracks. Tomorrow, they say, will be even colder. But you've survived this one, and that counts twice if you count it right. Just before sleep, you whisper to no one in particular, "Let the snow have its glory. I'll keep my blanket." And somewhere deep in the walls, the pipes clink an approving rhythm, as if to say they're trying their best too. When the thaw finally comes, it doesn't arrive politely. It crashes. Snowmelt gushes down gutters like a city drunk on freedom, tram rails glint again, and people walk faster, smiling for no reason they'd admit. You can almost hear the concrete sigh with relief. But the ice melting on rooftops isn't the only thaw this year. Politics has caught fever too. It's the mid-1950s, and Stalin is gone. His portraits still hang in offices, but their eyes have lost authority. Dust gathers on the corners of frames where fear once lived. On the radio, officials speak more softly now, testing their tone like people learning to laugh again. Khrushchev makes speeches about reform, truth, renewal, words that sound like spring itself. You walk through the streets, clutching a newspaper headlined The Secret Speech. Nobody calls it that out loud. Of course, that's what the Western stations are naming it. But everyone whispers the same thing. He denounced Stalin. The thought feels impossible, like hearing the stars apologize for gravity. At work the next day, conversation dances around the subject. No one speaks first. Finally, Anya from the next machine leans close and murmurs, "Maybe now my father's photo can go back on the shelf." You nod quietly. It lands heavier than gossip ever should. Thousands of families share that same thought. A mainstream fact unfolds beneath your memory. After the 1956 20th Party Congress, Khrushchev's denunciation of Stalin's crimes shocked an entire generation. The thaw, as it came to be known, loosened censorship, freed political prisoners, and dared to acknowledge the purges that had haunted the country's silence for decades. Historians still argue whether this thaw truly warmed hearts or simply prevented another frost. You notice people reading again in public. Poetry, essays, the kind with soul instead of statistics. A bulletin board near the tram stop now carries lines by Yevtushenko. The future will not forgive those who fear the past. You mouth the words as if tasting something both raw and forbidden. Cafes you never noticed start hosting small readings, and radio hosts sound almost human. One night, you find yourself in a public library that used to be perpetually empty. Now it's crowded, filled with young people scribbling fervently, debating novels instead of grain quotas. Did you read Solzhenitsyn? Someone whispers beside you. You shake your head. He writes about camps, the real ones. The sentence lands like wet snow on warm ground, melting, shocking, cleansing. You make a note of the name. Still, habit doesn't melt as quickly as snow. The older generation keeps glancing over shoulders, their speech measured even when reciting jokes again. Fear, it seems, has a half-life. One evening, your neighbor Victor invites you over for tea. Between sips, he says quietly, "You remember those men we used to never talk about? So and so, who vanished around 39. Turns out they're publishing letters from the archives. Their names are being cleared." His eyes shine, halfway between relief and disbelief. Cleared! Like stains that were never ours to begin with. You both sit there, the kettle whistling long past necessity. There's joy, but it feels fragile, as if the air itself isn't ready for too much truth. A quirky tidbit you recall from a magazine. One newspaper printed its first public apology for misinformation, claiming a printer's error caused decades of slander. It might have been satire, but the line went around the country like a parable. How much history could be explained by printer's error and silence? The streets changed tone with the light. Where once walls carried stern commands, now new posters appear, bright colors, optimistic smiles, slogans about peace, friendship, and youth. Even laughter has re-entered the official vocabulary. Children sing new songs about rockets instead of wars, parks host outdoor dances instead of parades. Still, old instincts remain. At a cafe, you overhear someone mutter that this freedom feels rehearsed. His friend hushes him immediately. Progress has boundaries. The thaw may melt the surface, but deep beneath, distrust still sleeps like permafrost. Historians debate whether the thaw was revolution or renovation. You feel it in smaller ways when jokes return to kitchens, when forbidden books circulate without disguises, when your heart stops flinching every time someone knocks at night. History's big shifts begin in trivial relief. Late one evening, as you walk home along the river, ice chunks float by, reflecting streetlights like shattered mirrors. You pause on the bridge, watching them drift away. People pass behind you, chatting loudly, no longer whispering. The sound startles you. The normalcy itself feels bold. Somewhere a band plays on a loudspeaker, a new patriotic melody but lighter, almost a waltz. You sway unconsciously. After years of marches, 3 before time feels like rebellion. The river murmurs beneath you, swollen with runoff from melted fear. At home, you pull an old photo album from a drawer. Pages filled with faces you were once told to forget stare back, as if resurfacing through thawed ice. One man's faded uniform, one woman's forced smile. You whisper their names quietly, not aloud, but enough. The walls don't answer, and for the first time, that feels like forgiveness rather than surveillance. Spring wind leaks through your cracked window, carrying smells of wet pavement and optimism. You could almost believe cleansing is possible. Not the rewriting kind, but the human one, where truth melts just enough to let flowers push through. You blow out your candle and sit for a moment in the dark, listening to the slow drip of ice from your roof. The sound is gentle, rhythmic, alive, the thaw's lullaby. Maybe tomorrow, you think, the sun will dare to stay out just a little longer. You start noticing them first in cafes and public parks, the young ones with ink-stained fingers, unruly hair, and an unmistakable glint in their eyes. They call themselves the Szestajdziatniki, the 60s generation, and whether or not they coined the name themselves, it sticks. They speak with the wild optimism of people convinced that words can fix the world. After years of silence, their chatter sounds like the thaw made human. You meet them one evening at a modest cafe tucked behind a bookstore. The sign outside reads, Kalyato, Coffee and Dreams. It's poorly lit, smells faintly of cigarette smoke and fresh newsprint, and hums with ideas too loud for its square footage. You sit near the window, pretending to read while eavesdropping. At the next table, two students argue about art. One insists that truth must sound like music. The other claims music should be dangerous enough to sound like truth. They're both right, of course, but neither seems interested in winning, only in being heard. You can almost feel the heat of youth ricochet off the peeled walls. A mainstream fact to keep your footing. This was the blooming of Soviet intellectual life under Khrushchev's cultural thaw. Magazines like Yunost and Novi Mir published controversial literature. Poetry readings filled stadiums, and for a short shimmering stretch of time, artists believed art might genuinely be free. You hear laughter erupt near the counter. Someone in a gray jacket waves a book like a flag. It's Yevgeny Yevtushenko's Babi Yar, the poem that dared to name Jewish suffering when silence was the safer choice. The cafe applauds instinctively. Even the waitress looks proud as she wipes cups that haven't seen soap in days. The conversation spreads like wildfire. A girl with short hair recites Mayakovsky between drags of a cigarette, voice low but electric. Another boy talks about moral responsibility and how the poet must tell what others fear to whisper. You can't help smiling. It's as if the steam from each coffee cup carries a manifesto. Someone turns toward you suddenly. And what do you believe in, comrade? The question lands like a challenge, but the eyes behind it are kind. You pause, letting the question simmer along with the coffee's aroma. I believe. You say slowly that sometimes the simplest honesty is already poetry. There's a murmur of agreement. The boy nods like you've passed an invisible test. Outside, the city hums with the same restless lifeblood. Streets stretch under banners about peace while, inside cramped rooms, typewriters clack out verses that wouldn't pass any censor's test, but survive anyway through carbon copies and memory. A quirky tidbit reaches your table. Someone whispers about an underground reading that drew 8,000 people at the Polytechnic Institute last month. 8,000! Not for a politician or a band, but for poetry. They say entire crowd waves moved in rhythm, chanting lines like hymns. You imagine it. A generation who'd rather weep for metaphors than for ration lines. Even censors reportedly applauded, unsure whether to imprison or promote half the participants. Historians still argue whether these poets truly believed in socialism or were already halfway out the ideological door. Sitting there among clinking mugs and smoky laughter, you realize it doesn't even matter. Belief here isn't political. It's personal. It's the faith that language, freshly thawed, can still build something true before the frost returns. Later that night, the conversation drifts to jazz. Of course, because everything revolutionary eventually marries rhythm. A man with a small accordion plays a slow, mournful tune. Half Gershwin, half guesswork, and someone quotes Pasternak under their breath. You lean back, dizzy from caffeine and idealism. This is what freedom tastes like: underheated coffee, overflowing ashtrays, words unapproved but unstoppable. When the cafe closes, the group spills onto the street. their breath glowing in the cold like visible dreams. One of them hands you a mimeographed booklet filled with poems. "Keep it," she says. "If they find me with extras, I'll have to explain." You tuck it safely into your coat as if it were treasure, which in this world it is. Walking home, you read by lamplight, fingers smudged with cheap ink. Some lines are too fragile to last, but others seem eternal verses about trains that never arrive, about spring that refuses to leave, about honesty that costs less than fear but pays more than rubles. The city's noise fades behind you, replaced by the sound of your heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of words. You remember your parents' generation. How careful they were, how clipped their sentences, how even laughter seemed rationed. Now, these young poets throw laughter around like confetti, daring anyone to sweep it up. The change is subtle but seismic, like the first tremor before a landslide. Back in your flat, you spread the booklet on the table. Some poems are typed crooked. One corner smells faintly of candle wax, as if born in secret. You read them all. Then you close your eyes and imagine the murmuring crowd, the glowing faces, the fragile hope that words might outrun ideology for once. Before bed, you tuck the poems under your pillow. A superstition, maybe, a talisman. You fall asleep to the faint echo of applause that belongs to no one and everyone. A chorus of young voices shouting into history's ear, begging it to finally listen. In dreams, the words rearrange themselves into constellations, new stars for an old sky. Somewhere out there, an unseen hand keeps writing. And for tonight, at least, nobody dares erase it. Morning creeps pale through your frozen window, and your first thought is breakfast. But your second is the missing sugar. The jar sits nearly empty, a few stubborn crystals clinging to the bottom like memories of sweeter days. You tap it gently, hoping more will appear through persistence alone. It doesn't. Survival here is an economy of expectation management. You pull your coat tight and step out to join the line at the provisions shop. Every block has its cue, that ever-lengthening expression of patience. The wind hums through the corridor of bodies like a low hymn. Inside, the clerk's breath condenses on the glass of the counter display, stale biscuits, gray sausage, bottled pickles with mysterious histories. Floor today. Someone ahead of you mutters, but no soap. You smile faintly. There's always something, never everything. History could probably be summarized that way. You buy what you can, a stub of margarine, half a kilo of buckwheat, and satisfaction disguised as gratitude. Each item smells faintly metallic, as if rationing has its own scent. When you're asked to show your ration coupons, you realize you've worn the paper thin from constant use, folded, unfolded, stamped, and handled until it's more story than document. Back home, you inventory your pantry like a museum curator: beans, salt, that single jar of pickles gifted by a visiting aunt from the countryside. The Mona Lisa of your shelf. Clara's voice drifts through the thin walls, instructing someone on new ways to cook cabbage. There's a faint sense of camaraderie even in shortage. Misery sounds less miserable when it simmers. A mainstream fact: urban shortages were a fact of life in the later Soviet decades. Distribution favored image over need, lavish parades of production alongside real queues for essentials. By the 1970s, people didn't ask if something was missing, they asked what's available today. Bread might vanish for days, shoes could disappear by season. Shortage was an anomaly, it was rhythm. You decide to cook what you have: buckwheat with onions, simple and honest. The smell fills the kitchen, earthy and comforting, masking the faint mildew that never truly leaves. You eat slowly, half enjoying, half conserving. Hunger is never an emergency here. It's a companion, just talkative enough to remind you you're alive. In the communal hallway, exchanges happen like diplomatic summits. You trade a spoonful of margarine to the neighbor upstairs for 2 matches. Later, Clara agrees to share her cabbage stew if you part with half your tea. It's all fair, built on mutual exhaustion and survival instinct. The Blatt network never dies, it just changes flavor. At night, you sit by the small table, planning meals like strategies in a silent war. Maybe tomorrow the bakery gets sugar. Maybe someone's cousin's husband, who drives trucks for the ministry, can bring something back from Riga. Life becomes a web of rumor-based optimism. A quirky tidbit lightens the gloom. In the shortages of the 70s, urban legend claimed mayonnaise could heal cracked hands in winter. For weeks, your mother swore by it until Clara told her she was smelling like hope gone bad. Still, the jar stayed half empty from medical use. Every household has its own mythology of scarcity. Later in the week, you wake to more news of shortages: no matches, no pasta, definitely no coffee. The man at the kiosk laughs darkly. Who needs coffee? You'll wake up from hunger just as fast. You can't tell if it's philosophy or despair, but you chuckle anyway. Humor keeps the air breathable. In quieter moments, you reflect on how shortage redefines value. A slice of bread becomes conversation. A piece of chocolate triggers loyalty. Even conversation itself, something free, begins to feel like wealth. Historians still argue whether scarcity ground people down or bound them together. Maybe both. Shared deprivation forges peculiar tenderness. Outside, the city looks deceptively normal. Shop windows display artfully arranged emptiness, 3 cans of tinned peas forming geometric perfection. Mannequins wear summer dresses in midwinter because no one ever updates the displays. Children press noses against the glass, dreaming of worlds more colorful than cabbage greens. One afternoon, your friend Ania visits, bearing gifts from her cousin who works at the Seaport Lemons. Real ones, yellow and absurdly fragrant. The entire apartment fills with their smell, sun-captured and rind. You cut one into thin slices and float it in hot water. The sharp steam feels almost luxurious. For 20 minutes, you both sip it in silence, eyes half closed as if worshipping light itself. That night, you write in your notebook, "Luxury is the act of pretending enough is plenty." The sentence feels too wise for hunger, but true enough to keep. Before sleeping, you look around your tiny room, half full, half wanting, and realize that shortage changes not just habits but measures of happiness. You no longer dream of abundance, just of constancy, a full bread basket, a working bulb, a day without cues. And somehow that seems almost holy. Outside, freezing rain begins to whisper against the window. You pull the blanket close, still tasting lemon on your lips, and remind yourself that even thin soup tastes better when shared. The night hums with the faint chorus of kettles boiling behind other walls. A small, defiant symphony of survival. You smile because hunger may gnaw, but it cannot silence music made of teaspoons and tea. And in this thin warmth, sustained by jokes and buckwheat, you drift into sleep convinced that shortages can starve everything but the human instinct to make dough, and the quiet art of finding joy anyway. It begins as a rumor drifting through the marketplace like faint smoke. Something happened to the north, they say. An incident. The word lingers, vague and unsettling. You shrug it off at first. The news always travels warped here, shaped by gossip before truth catches up. Yet by evening, even the radio sounds uneasy. A measured voice speaks of an accident at a power station and assures everyone that the situation is under control. Those phrases always mean the opposite. Days pass. The air feels different, not thicker, not darker, just heavier, as if the sky itself is holding its breath. Rumors multiply wildly. A reactor exploded. No, just a fire. It's in Ukraine. It's near the city called Pripyat. Children evacuated. Each version contradicts the last, but everyone agrees on one unspoken truth: something monstrous has happened, and no one's allowed to know how monstrous. You turn off the radio, stare at the window pane where sunlight falls too bright, unnaturally sharp. There's an irony so sharp it hurts. After decades of grayness, suddenly the light feels dangerous. A mainstream fact: it's April 1986, And Chernobyl's reactor No. 4 has exploded. Clouds of radioactive dust drift invisibly over Belarus, the Baltics, and half of Europe. Western stations broadcast frantic updates while Soviet media maintains a deliberate calm, releasing only selective truth. Historians still argue whether delay was denial or strategy. Neighbors whisper in doorways. Someone says iodine pills are being distributed somewhere, but no one knows where or whether they work. People wash their windows compulsively, as if cleanliness can undo radiation. You catch Clara muttering that she's heard milk isn't safe, but then she adds, it's probably just Western lies. Everyone is terrified but too disciplined to show it. At the corner shop, strawberries appear, early, suspiciously vibrant. You stare at them. They look like perfection, a color that demands belief. The woman beside you whispers, they grow them near Kiev. You put your coins back in your pocket. Others still buy them. Hunger, habit, it's all the same force. A quirky tidbit. Weeks after the explosion, Moscow held its traditional Midday parade under crystal, blue skies dusted with fallout few dared acknowledge. Children waved red balloons. Leaders smiled from the balcony as invisible particles drifted through the air. Official photographs show nothing amiss except too much sunlight. You walk those same kinds of streets, notebook hidden in your coat pocket, writing phrases in your head you'll never dare print. The sky means something new now. The sentences feel radioactive in their own way. That evening, on the tram home, a man leans close and whispers. They say rain carries it. Don't get wet. He pulls his hat lower, as if raindrops could remember faces. Everyone nods without speaking. You've never seen an entire tram share one thought before. It's eerie solidarity born of invisible peril. News trickles through anyway. Through foreign voices picked up on shortwave radio, through phone calls from relatives evacuated for medical checks. You learn new words: contamination, dosage, isotopes. You learn new silences, too, how to end sentences in ellipses when words begin to feel censored mid-breathe. That night, your kettle hisses louder than usual, and you imagine each raindrop outside might glow if only you turned off all the lights. You don't test the theory. Instead, you pour tea carefully through a folded cloth, just in case. Rationally, you know it changes nothing. Emotionally, it feels like doing something, and something is enough. The next morning, the government finally admits the incident, promising it poses no significant danger. Nobody laughs, but the air inside the tram hums with sarcastic tension anyway. A man mutters, if it were harmless, they'd say nothing. You agree silently. Historians will later argue whether this disaster cracked faith in the Soviet system permanently. Maybe trust wasn't shattered. Maybe it simply evaporated, particle by invisible particle, just like the radioactive dust now settling on streets and rooftops. In your courtyard, children still play, though mothers yell at them to come inside. Before the wind changes, the phrase takes on a prophetic weight. Laundry lines hang empty now, and the smell of detergent seems almost patriotic, proof of cleanliness, of defiance. You find yourself glancing upward every few minutes, as though the sky might confess. It doesn't. It glows pale and steady, a liar's expression. One night, you have a dream you're back at the beach years ago, swimming through sun, bright water. But instead of waves, it's dust swirling around you, slow and glittering, beautiful and deadly. When you wake, your skin is clammy, your window fogged. You sit there, heart pounding, and think how surreal it is that terror can arrive without form, without sound, just lingering quietly like a rumor you inhale. The government news bulletins shift tone, mentioning heroic measures by firefighters, praising volunteers, avoiding words like meltdown. You picture anonymous men climbing ladders against an inferno none of them could see. You wonder which word fits them better, heroes or sacrifices, and realize the difference is mostly timing. In the weeks that follow, life returns to an imitation of normal. Stores reopen, trams resume, and conversations veer back towards soap and sugar. The danger, unseen, fades from conversation because there's nowhere safe to rest it. But every so often, someone coughs unexpectedly, or a rumor of sickness circulates, and the quiet dread resurfaces, familiar as hunger. You learn to measure fear's half-life too. It doesn't disappear, it just stops glowing enough for others to look away. Tonight, before bed, you close your window tightly. The air feels clean again, but clean is a word that's lost trust. You turn off the light and lie awake, listening to the hum of distant transformers, wondering how many things can explode unseen and still leave the world looking exactly the same. By the late 80s, the air hums differently, something restless, electric. The news, once predictable as sunrise, now delivers surprises, new words, bolder headlines, faces you haven't seen before speaking almost honestly on television. Radios crackle with rhythms your parents would have called decadent rock. Pop, Western whispers sneaking in through static. You'd call it freedom music if freedom were a sound. At first, it drifts casually from open windows. A borrowed tape, a black market copy of a Western record, a bootleg concert recorded on bones of X-rays again. But soon it becomes a flood. You hear it everywhere in basements, dormitories, schoolyards, even factory locker rooms. Someone always knows someone who has that new recording by Kino or Nautilus Pompilius. Those names start to feel sacred, half myth, half revelation. One winter night, your friend Anya drags you to an unofficial concert, held in the basement of the House of Culture. The chairs are mismatched, the amps borrowed, the room so thick with smoke that breathing counts as participation. The lights dim, not government-issue theater bulbs, but a single naked lamp hung on wire. Then the first chords ring out. The sound is raw, imperfect, electric with confession. Guitars rasp against amplifiers, voices crack at the edges, and every lyric feels like someone reading your diary out loud. Nobody claps between songs. They shout, whistle, stomp, as if trying to shake the ceiling loose. And underneath the noise lies the quiet awe of being allowed to feel something unapproved. You look around and realize everyone else is grinning too hard to hide it. A mainstream historical fact, the Soviet underground rock movement of the 1980s, centered in cities like Leningrad, Moscow, and Sverdlovsk, operated under layers of semi-legal tolerance. Officially, rock was decadent. Unofficially, it was unstoppable. Bands like Kino, Aquarium, and Machina Vremeni smuggled rebellion through melody. Even the KGB eventually gave up trying to track every chord. When the band finishes, the lead singer leans toward the sputtering microphone, sweat glinting on his forehead. "We just play what we can't say," he murmurs. The audience erupts again. That's your first joke tonight. Truth disguised as understatement. Afterward, you and Anya wander outside, the cold biting at your faces. Snowflakes drift slow and heavy, glowing under street lamps. Your ears still buzz from the music. Standing there, you realize something intoxicating for the first time in your life. No anthem plays in your head. It's just your own heartbeat keeping rhythm. Do you think they'll let us listen to this on the radio someday? You ask. Anya shrugs. They'd have to admit we exist first. She laughs afterward, breath turning to smoke. You both laugh with her, because laughter feels closer to belief than politics ever did. The following days, your world reshapes itself around sound. Teenagers with scratched guitars jam in courtyards, power lines hum like tuning forks, and bootleg tapes migrate like sacred relics in brown paper sleeves. Even Clara from the corridor mutters grudging admiration. At least these new songs have rhythm. A quirky tidbit surfaces through the grapevine in 1986. An official rock club finally opened in Leningrad, registered under the Komsomol. Government oversight tried to civilize rebellion by scheduling it. But instead of taming art, they accidentally gave it an address. Bureaucracy birthed revolution in a notepad. Historians still argue whether underground rock toppled walls or merely serenaded them on the way down. Either way, Its echo stretched beyond party lines. It made loneliness sound communal. One evening, Victor visits, bringing a tape labeled Nautilus Pompilius Goodbye, America. You listen together in silence, the melody slow and sorrowful. When the final lyric fades, he exhales, I never thought longing could be patriotic. You nod. There's something profound about missing a place you've never seen. Outside, spring insists on returning. The air smells of thawing river mud and change. On billboards, new faces appear. Politicians promising glasnost and perestroika, openness and rebuilding. Big words, soft edges, music like syllables. Gorbachev's name hums on every tongue. In the cafes, students debate the meaning of it all. Some predict miraculous end of censorship, freedom of movement, genes for everyone. Others warn it's another myth in progress. You listen quietly, noticing how conversations no longer lower their voices automatically. That silence you grew up with, it's leaking out through every open window, replaced by argument, laughter, songs. It's messy, it's beautiful. One night you return to the same basement where the concert happened, now half legal and half broken. The same band plays again, this time louder, braver. Mid-song, the lights flicker out entirely. No one panics. People hold up lighters, sparks dancing in the dark. The singer's voice continues, unamplified but steady, echoing through the concrete like gospel. When the song ends, no one wants to leave. Walking home through the echoing streets, you hum the tune under your breath. It feels foreign and familiar, forbidden and necessary. You realize this is what the future must sound like before anyone writes laws about it. Raw, off-key, full of mistakes and truth. Something in you shifts that night. The fear still lives somewhere deep, but it has to share space now with defiance, with rhythm. With the simplest thought in the world, things can change. For the first time since childhood, you believe it. At your window, city lights twinkle like stage lamps, each one keeping time to a melody you can almost hear. Somewhere nearby, a radio plays faint strains of guitar, bleeding across walls thin as history's patience. And you smile, because even if tomorrow reverts to slogans and shortages, tonight belongs to sound, bright, imperfect, untamed. Music, after all, has always been hope's favorite disguise. The word glasnost starts to spill from every radio, every newspaper headline, every uneasy smile. Openness, transparency. The syllables feel conspiratorial, almost glamorous. For years, you trained your ears to filter truth through static and omission, and suddenly, the static is gone. What's left is unsettling clarity. At first, you don't believe it. People speak openly in cues now, criticizing, comparing, joking. In the factory, someone tells a story about a director caught hoarding Western goods. Everyone laughs, no one flinches. You almost look over your shoulder out of habit, but bite the reflex back. Old instincts die noisily. You pick up a new issue of Pravda on your way home. The front page runs what would once have been unspeakable statistics on pollution, complaints about food shortages, even cautious admissions of bureaucratic failure. You read twice, suspicious you've missed the punchline. The format's the same, columns, slogans, patriotic fonts, but the words breathe. A mainstream historical truth under Mikhail Gorbachev's rule, glasnost, openness, and perestroika's restructuring redefined Soviet life from the mid-1980s onward. Censorship eased, archives creaked open, and long-suppressed truths resurfaced like thawed ghosts. Historians still argue whether glasnost liberated the people or merely revealed how trapped they were all along. At night, television screens glow with debates, real ones, not rehearsed theater. Scholars argue about history on public channels. Writers once exiled now appear in studio lights, voices shaking with disbelief. People stay up late, transfixed, whispering their own opinions aloud for the first time. It's intoxicating, like breathing oxygen after years underground. Even Clara, the hallway guardian of propriety, softens. One evening she knocks on your door holding a newspaper, finger trembling over an article exposing an old injustice. They finally printed it, she says, tears darkening her lashes. Do you know? I thought we imagined it all. For once, her moral certainty bends into fragile release. But openness carries its own weight. When you can finally speak, you discover how exhausting it is to remember everything you couldn't say. Conversations stretch into morning, griefs older than you gather at kitchen tables. Laughter begins cautiously, pauses often, then surges again when someone realizes no one's knocking. Rumors become realities overnight, lists of rehabilitated victims, statistics of censorship, details of gulags that everyone didn't know but somehow knew. Names, dates, coordinates. You listen to radio hosts reading letters from the past, each voice steady only until it quivers. Entire generations finally stop whispering and start weeping. Your factory colleagues debate whether truth is progress or punishment. Anya, ever the realist, says, "We asked for openness, not a mirror." You laugh softly, but it's nervous laughter. Transparency cuts both ways. It shows the stains as well as the scars. A quirky tidbit emerges. A bulletin in Izvestia admits that for decades, imported bubble gum wrappers were printed with Western pop stars to distract customs officers from political smuggling. Children had been trading miniature propaganda all along and never knew it. The irony feels poetic, so modern it hurts. Amid the honesty, uncertainty multiplies. Voices differ on what freedom should look like. Lines form outside bookstores, now instead of bakeries. Everyone desperate for banned titles, Solzhenitsyn, Bulgakov, Akhmatova. You buy a copy of The Master and Margarita and read it in a single night, startled by how truth disguised as fantasy can feel safer than reality dressed as speech. The next day, on your tram ride, you overhear strangers debating politics as if they're characters in that novel. One proclaiming faith in change, the other insisting the system can't survive its own honesty. Their argument hangs in the stale air like electricity. Historians call this the decade of transition, but you know transitions aren't tidy. Prices rise, shelves thin further, optimism tastes increasingly bitter. People still queue, now for imported toothpaste instead of bread. Yet even standing in line, they joke more boldly, curse louder, dream harder. The queue has become a seminar on freedom. One night, you attend a public meeting about reform discussions. The old auditorium, once draped in portraits of leaders, now sports peeling paint and passionate amateurs arguing over the Constitution. From the podium, a young economist speaks about private enterprise, words that would have drawn gasps years ago. Today, applause. Afterward, you linger on the steps with a group of strangers smoking in the cold. Someone says, "We've been asleep too long." Another answers, "Yes, but we're still in bed." Laughter, tired, wry. 3 jokes for the evening complete. You walk home under buzzing streetlights. Posters for new cooperatives, cafes, repair shops, cinemas flutter against the wind. Their slogans are earnest and clumsy.
We'll work for ourselves and you too.
You smile, awkward freedom is still freedom. At home, you put on a late-night broadcast, an unfiltered investigative report on corruption. The host doesn't raise his voice, he doesn't need to. Truth, after so much silence, already sounds deafening. When the program ends, you sit there long after the screen fades to snow. The city outside hums soft but alive. Somewhere, a printing press rolls out another page of unspeakable truths turned headlines. Somewhere else, an old man burns his party membership card in a stove, not out of hate but exhaustion. You pull the curtains open, letting the glow of street lamps bathe your room. The light feels warmer tonight, almost forgiving. You whisper into the quiet, "So this is what openness feels like? Messy, bright, unstoppable." Your reflection in the glass stares back, older, calmer. For the first time, it doesn't look afraid of its own voice. Change comes quietly at first, through faces on the evening news, through phrases no one used to say out loud. Baltiski front of singing revolution. Solidarity in Poland. Let them go their own way. You watch from your kitchen table, halfway between fascination and disbelief. Borders, once ironclad in geography and ideology, begin to shimmer like heat haze. The Baltic republics light candles in their cathedral squares. Czechs gather in Wenceslas Square with keys jingling in their pockets like permission. In Poland, crowds chant, "Freedom," as though the word itself could break concrete. And somehow, in this crumbling theater, the Soviet audience can finally hear the music bleeding through the walls. You make tea and listen to the BBC on shortwave. No longer illegal, not yet entirely legal either. The voice crackles with impossible sentences. East Germany opens its border. The Berlin Wall breached by crowds. You almost drop your cup. That wall, which had seemed more mountain than man-made, is coming apart brick by brick, souvenir by souvenir. A mainstream historical fact between 1989 and 1990, communist regimes across Eastern Europe collapsed in a cascade of revolutions, mostly bloodless, almost surreal. The USSR watched its satellite states untether one after another, while Gorbachev spoke of reform, dialogue, restructuring. Historians still argue whether he loosened the reins or simply lost his grip. At your workplace, no one speaks freely about it yet, but the energy has changed. There's excitement, edged with fear. Liberation is contagious but unpredictable. Factories may close, promises may evaporate, but even cynics sense that something irreversible has begun. You walk home through newly repaired streets. Graffiti appears overnight, strange words in Western alphabets. Someone spray-painted "Okech Swastem" across the tram stop. A joke, maybe, or prophecy. No one scrubs it off. The gray market mutates into actual commerce. Stalls sprout everywhere, rubles and dollars trade hands side by side. Imported goods gleam under flickering fluorescent lights. Jeans, sneakers, cassette players. People crowd around as if viewing wildlife from another planet. You touch the fabric cautiously, as though it might vanish if handled wrong. One afternoon, you pass a kiosk where Western magazines hang like forbidden fruit. You buy one just to feel the weight of glossy paper, photos of cities that look too clean, faces that look too sure. The pages smell faintly of promise and ink. A quirky tidbit floats through rumor some citizens in the Baltic states begin saving Soviet coins they believe will soon become worthless historical trinkets. Entire households turn drawers into miniature museums of the almost past. One neighbor jokes, "Better to collect the empire before it collects us." Evenings grow louder. Radio hosts debate with callers. Teenagers compose songs about democracy. Old poets recite verses banned for decades. Public squares fill, not with tanks, but with arguments and laughter. You attend one rally just to see it. Lace-gloved grandmothers clapping beside scruffy students. Banners stitched from recycled bedsheets reading, "Glasnost forever." The air smells of rain and cigarette smoke, but also, impossibly, of patience ending gracefully. You notice how people talk now using plural pronouns differently. We no longer means the people and the state. It just means us, the ordinary kind. The separation feels both thrilling and terrifying. Historians call this the beginning of the end. But living through it, it feels like the middle of everything. Each morning you wake expecting some structure to collapse, yet every evening the world still stands, rearranged but intact, like a house that insists on surviving its own renovation. In the courtyards, children play Berlin Wall, stacking snow into small barricades, only to kick them down triumphantly. They don't understand the metaphor, but their laughter fits history's tempo perfectly. On television, there are new faces, politicians with rumpled suits and uncertain smiles. They speak of autonomy, choice, fresh wind, as if testing how far the language can stretch before it snaps. Each sentence feels improvised, history dictated live. At the market, vendors shout prices in foreign currency just to see if anyone notices. Someone actually smiles when you hand them change. They thank you in English. "Have nice day." You're oddly touched by how unfinished their grammar sounds, like freedom learning to speak for the first time. On your way home, you pause by a newspaper stand. The headline reads, "The Iron Curtain is no more." The vendor shrugs. They say, "We'll have Coca-Cola soon." He smirks. "Maybe peace will come bottled." You laugh until he joins in, and for a moment the two of you are just citizens of a changing century, laughing over fizz and irony. There's your third joke of the night, unplanned but perfect. That evening, through your open window, you hear a distant chorus of voices singing an old folk song, soft, mournful, swelling with layered harmonies. It's not an anthem, not propaganda, not protest, just human. You lean out, the cool wind brushing your face. The sound feels like a tide rising gently, washing over rusted fences and tired hearts alike. It strikes you then that no single moment marks the end of an empire. Endings are slow dissolves, measured in decibels and heartbeats. What you're witnessing isn't collapse, it's release. You close the window but keep the sound inside you, humming softly while setting the table for dinner. The newsreader drones on about reform committees, exchange rates, negotiations, but you're already somewhere else, standing in a future that doesn't fully exist yet, illuminated by street lamps and backward-glancing hope. For the first time, you realize that history isn't something you survive. It's something that survives you. And tonight, it's smiling like a country that's learning how to breathe again. By the time the 1990s shadow the horizon, you can feel the air vibrate with exhaustion. Everyone is waiting for something to break, quietly hoping it won't be them. The newspapers still promise reform, elections, progress. The television talks of a renewed union. But on the streets, the currency falls faster than snow. Rubles lose weight day by day, turned flimsy by rumor and reality. You keep small bills in books now, between pages of poems, beneath calendars, as though words themselves could keep them from vanishing. Lines still exist, but now they form in front of exchange offices where people turn paper promises into harder, colder metal. A mainstream fact by 1990, the Soviet economy was unraveling. Inflation soared, goods disappeared entirely. The ruble plummeted. What the state called restructuring had become survival by improvisation. Historians still debate whether collapse was inevitable or accidental. A long-standing machine finally seizing under its own weight. At the factory, the machines run slower, the noise dulled to a weary hum. The supervisor no longer bothers quoting slogans. Instead, he sighs, handing out pay packets that are both too light and too late. Patience, comrades. He mutters, though his smile looks older than steel. At home, you notice silence creeping into everything. Less laughter from the courtyard, fewer voices behind closed doors. Even Clara, indefatigable keeper of decency, forgets to scold anyone. One evening you hear her through the wall, praying softly to a god she no longer tries to hide. Then, one August afternoon, the radio erupts tanks in Moscow, strange speeches, voices quivering with urgency. Another committee, they say, trying to save order from chaos. You freeze halfway through making tea, the teaspoon trembling in your hand. Out the window, the city feels suspended, uncertain whether to blink. You turn up the volume. The announcer says power has shifted again, and again no one knows where it will land. But people are already gathering in the capital. Students, soldiers, clerks, standing in front of gray buildings with flowers instead of guns. A woman on the broadcast says she's never seen so many strangers protecting something invisible. You realize she means hope. A quirky tidbit surfaces days later. One of the tanks that rolled into Moscow carried a handwritten sign taped to its turret. "We're with you." It became legend before nightfall. For 3 days, you hardly sleep. Everyone listens, whispers, waits. Then, miraculously, the voices on the radio shift tone, the tremor becomes laughter. The coup fails. People in Moscow chew on victory like fresh bread, hungry, unbelieving. But the relief doesn't last. 2 weeks later, another announcement. This time, quieter, simple. The union is dissolving. You sit at your kitchen table, hand resting on a cold cup of tea. while the announcer lists newly independent republics one by one. The familiar map in your mind begins to tear along its seams. You glance at the red flag pinned above the doorway. It's faded, frayed. You should take it down, but your body refuses movement, caught between memory and disbelief. The next morning, stores replace the state emblem on labels with neutral designs. Birds, stars, vague optimism. Even the vodka comes with new branding, as if taste itself can realign allegiance. Pensioners queue for hours, clutching their savings, unsure if tomorrow's currency will still recognize them. You stand behind them, aware that you are witnessing something both immense and absurd, an empire unthreading in real time. Historians will later debate the causes: oil, ideology, economics. But from your window, the cause looks simpler. People are tired. Tired of pretending, waiting, rationing patience. Reform is no longer a path, it's a blur of footprints leading away from a home no one admits is burning. You walk through the market one afternoon, noticing how everyone's voice sounds different now. Lower, quieter, but strangely alive. On one stall sits a pile of trinkets, badges with hammers and sickles, party ID holders, a replica Lenin made of plaster. The vendor shouts, "Collect while it's still history!" You laugh despite yourself and buy a small pin, purely for irony, souvenir of belonging you no longer owe. That night, the television shows parliaments signing treaties, flags being replaced, anthems rewritten. Gorbachev resigns. The red flag over the Kremlin descends slowly into evening haze. You sit staring at the screen long after it fades to black. Clara knocks softly and enters without ceremony. "It's over?" she says. You nod, but she corrects you. "No, it's beginning." Then she pours 2 cups of tea with the composure of someone who has survived every regime by boiling water with equal care. Your third joke arrives from the absurdity itself. You reach for sugar only to find the jar, yet again empty. You chuckle. Even the Empire couldn't fix that. Clara laughs too, tears rolling unnoticed. Later that night, you stand at the window. Snowflakes drift lazily through the beam of a street lamp. Somewhere in the courtyard below, a boy hums the anthem, fragments of it, then silence, then a melody that doesn't belong to any country yet. You realize he's improvising, building his own song, because the official ones have run out. It hits you gently then, for decades, people only dreamed of change. Now, change itself has arrived, terrifying, magnificent, unpaid. You whisper to the empty room, "So this is freedom." The word feels raw and unfinished, like the first note of a new song that no one yet knows. You return to bed, unable to sleep, listening to the faint murmur of pipes and wind. The world feels lighter and lonelier all at once. When dawn comes, the flag above the government building will be different. But the same trams will screech through the same turns, and the same sun will rise, indifferent and faithful. And you, one small citizen among millions, will breathe in that cold, thin air of history and realize the strangest truth of all: endings sound a lot like beginnings if you close your eyes. The first winter after the flag fell feels unreal, like living in a film whose reel keeps skipping. You wake to the radio static of a vanished country. Even the announcer sounds lost, his voice timid without an anthem to guard it. Outside, the same streets stretch into the pale morning, but every billboard, store sign, and bureaucratic plaque has been stripped or renamed. You keep thinking the landscape has changed, but really it's just the lettering. Your ration cards are gone now, useless wooden relics of collective scarcity. Supermarkets promise freedom of choice, and for the first time in memory, the shelves are full. Yet it's a strange kind of abundance. Foreign chocolates, imported detergents, meats wrapped in plastic printed with languages you can't read. You stand there in awe, everything glowing beneath fluorescent light, and realize with painful honesty that you can't afford most of it. A mainstream fact in the early 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, state control of prices ended overnight. Liberty came paired with inflation so wild that salaries disintegrated mid-month. Historians still argue whether it was shock therapy or economic chaos dressed as medicine. Money loses meaning faster than new slogans appear. Rubles multiply in zeros, wages lag behind by months. You carry bills like origami in your coat pockets, stacked and folded, worth less each week. Clara calls it freedom's prank. You call it exhausting. Neighbors vanish quietly, some migrating to new republics, others chasing Western contracts that rarely come. You help carry Clara's suitcase to the train station when she leaves to join her daughter in Riga. At the platform, she hugs you tight, whispering, "You'll laugh again, you must." The train squeals away through falling snow, leaving you in silence thick enough to taste. Life rearranges itself clumsily. Your factory, once the heartbeat of the block, shutters within months, its machines sold or looted. The gate stands padlocked, the sign rusting. Lemon texts you calm eye, fading letter by letter. At night, stray dogs roam where you used to check in at dawn. No punch cards, no quotas, no sirens. Just quiet. You didn't know you'd miss the noise. You improvise work wherever possible, tutoring children in math, translating manuals for foreign traders, even selling knitted mittens at a half-legal market. Every transaction carries the bittersweet flavor of learning new anatomy. How capitalism breathes, eats, and occasionally chokes. A quirky tidbit floats through local rumor. Old Soviet coins become trendy jewelry pieces abroad. People pay more for them as memories than they were ever worth as currency. You consider stringing a few into a bracelet, a joke you could somehow sell. Humor, like rubles, might finally pay. In city squares, statues vanish slowly. Some are toppled by zeal, others by negligence, most simply fall over time. Children climb the empty pedestals, turning history into playgrounds. You pause one morning at an abandoned plinth where Lenin's boots remain, his torso removed. A pigeon perches on one boot, oblivious, proud. You whisper, even giants crumble by half. Still, not everything is bleak. The air hums with invention. New cafes, street vendors, artists selling paintings of once forbidden saints. The old theater revives experimental plays that make no sense but fill every seat. You attend one out of curiosity and end up laughing until tears sting. Freedom's learning curve is awkward, but laughter's fluency returns quickly. You meet Victor again, years older and thin from hard times, but bright-eyed. He's opening a tiny radio repair shop. The sign is handwritten, crooked honest. No guarantees. He jokes, but at least it's Mamin. You buy a used transistor from him. Not because you need one, but to help. And when he switches it on, a pop song blares in English. The beat is strange but joyful. He grins. The future's out of tune, but it plays. Historians will one day categorize this period as transition, but living through it feels more like free fall. The ground you stood on your whole life is still there, yet somehow less trustworthy. Everything solid has turned experimental. You can fail now, which is terrifying and oddly humane. And then there's the nostalgia, inescapable, soft, addictive. Even you, rational enough to know better, find yourself missing certain absurdities, the ration lines that enforced conversation, the predictability of scarcity, the steady hum of the state's paternal voice. History, you learn, doesn't just end. It lingers like a ghost that hums old anthems when the night goes quiet. You walk through a park one evening, frost crisp beneath your boots. The trees are black silhouettes, the air thick with distant traffic. A group of teenagers passes by, laughing, one carrying a portable speaker blasting Western rock, as if to prove they're born in a different century. You catch their energy, their unshakable ease with change, and something in you loosens. Later, at home, you brew tea from foreign leaves that taste unfamiliar but modern. The radio murmurs chaotic news of strikes, reforms, new governments being born and dissolved in weeks. You let the noise wash over you, comforted by the sheer mess of it all. At least it's your mess now. Before sleep, you open your notebook. a habit from older days, and write a single line. Freedom feels emptier than fear at first, but maybe that's necessary space for breathing. You close it, smile faintly, and let the pen rest. Outside, snow begins again, softening the sharp edges of rubble and optimism alike. In this hush, you realize how odd it is that the world could fall apart so completely and still sound so peaceful afterward. Tomorrow, you'll find work again. Someone's always fixing, trading, inventing. The city will move forward, perhaps unevenly, but definitely forward. You pour the last of your tea, raise it toward the window's faint reflection, and whisper, "To the new country," whatever its name. The reflection nods back, older but unafraid. The kettle hisses softly like applause. The years keep slipping forward, but pieces of the old world cling stubbornly. Rusted tram rails, fading murals, habits that refuse to retire. You live in a city newly renamed, though your tongue still hesitates before saying it. Street signs gleam fresh in Latin letters, while beneath them, the ghosts of Cyrillic names peek through the paint like repressed memory. You walk familiar routes to unfamiliar music. Small kiosks blasting Europop, children shouting brand slogans as if they were playground rhymes. The corners that once hosted speeches now hold cash machines. The future arrived. All right. It just turned out to prefer advertising jingles to anthems. The apartment block remains mostly intact, cracked, drafty, loyal. You still share gossip at the communal window ledge, though fewer voices echo through the hall. The kettle's whistle still announces survival, and the pipes still hum that old metallic lullaby of effort. Some constants deserve medals. A mainstream fact by the mid-1990s, most former Soviet republics raced through rapid privatization. Factories became offices, rubles turned into multiple currencies, and former comrades turned into businessmen overnight. Historians debate whether this was the dawn of democracy or the hangover of empire. For you, it's simpler. It's the way the grocery now sells both imported coffee and nostalgia candies wrapped in Soviet-style paper. Both items sell equally well. People crave sweetness. One for the mouth, one for memory. You earn your living translating now. Words finally pay where obedience never did. Sometimes, while rewriting ads for foreign brands eager to sound local, you laugh softly once. Every message had to pass censors. Today, every message just has to sell. Progress of a sort. The television blares chaos talk shows, scandals, endless debates on what freedom means now that everyone technically has it. One evening you switch it off mid-sentence and sit by the window instead, watching lights flicker across the skyline. Banks, clubs, churches, often all within the same block. The mix feels absurd and perfect. Among younger faces, the past becomes myth fast. In university courtyards, students wear vintage Soviet pins as ironic fashion. They call them aesthetic. You want to tell them how heavy those symbols once felt, but you stop. Let them treat it like costume jewelry. Perhaps beauty is how memory rehabilitates itself. A quirky tidbit you overhear at a cafe apparently, tourists now pay to sleep in, Soviet-style hostels with recycled decor, communal kitchens, portraits of Lenin, even bell-shaped telephones that don't connect to anything. They call it authentic experience. You nearly choke on your tea. History has turned into someone's weekend getaway. Sometimes you dream you're back in the queue for bread. The line stretches endlessly, but instead of resentment, you feel calm, reassured by the order of it, by the known hardship. When you wake, you smile at the absurd nostalgia. Humanity has a funny way of making peace with pain once it's safe to miss it. Historians still argue about the meaning of it all, the experiment, the ideology, the tragedy, the persistence. But people like you, alive in the aftermath, know that understanding isn't required for endurance. Life doesn't wait for analysis. It just reopens every morning and dares you to keep up. You make breakfast. The radio plays an American jazz tune remixed in local flavor. You tap your foot, amused at the full circle irony banned once, now background noise for weather reports. The world doesn't rewrite itself, it remixes. Later, you visit what used to be Red Square, now teeming with kiosks selling postcards of its former self. The air smells of roasted chestnuts instead of ideology. You stand there quietly, watching people pose for photos before the same walls that once watched you stare up in enforced awe. But now those walls just stand, harmless, ornamental. Time domesticated even them. You remember something the old priest once said long ago: we are all loyal to something. Maybe he was right. You stayed loyal to life, to laughter, to the rhythm of ordinary days that outlast banners and statues. Back home, you dig through an old drawer and find a scrap of Soviet ration paper, yellowed but intact. You smooth it out on the table, run your fingers across the faded ink, and whisper, "You built a world and forgot to design an exit." Then you tuck it gently back into a photo album, not as bitterness, but as punctuation. Night falls soft and ordinary. Through the window, you see young couples walking hand in hand beneath flashing signs, the glow reflected in melting snow. You realize the city looks more alive than ever. Not freer, not purer, but alive, which might be the best outcome history ever yields. You turn off the lights and sit quietly, listening to the faint murmur of traffic. The rhythm is the same one that's been with you through factories, parades, shortages, revolutions, the steady pulse of survival. You find it comforting, and as your eyes grow heavy, you whisper a small farewell to the past that cradled and crushed you. "We survived it, all of it?" You murmur. The wind outside answers politely against the glass, like applause fading in a theater at curtain call. Let the city fade for a bit. Breathe again. The buildings, the factories, the slow trains, they all dim now, sliding gently back into fog. You've walked through a century of noise, and the noise has finally run out. What remains is quiet, familiar, human. In that silence, you can still hear old sounds hiding beneath the calms, the creak of a metro escalator, the faint crackle of a record, laughter slipping through kitchen doors. They're ghosts, yes, but kind ones. Memories that hum just softly enough to lull you towards sleep. You imagine stepping once more into the courtyard of your childhood. The snow's clean again. The air smells of coal and soup. The tram bell rings somewhere far off, not urgently, just steady, marking another hour safely past. The radio from an upper window plays some nameless melody, one that feels like belonging. Now even that fades. The cobblestones dissolve beneath you. The light sinks warmer, slower. You let it. No more slogans, no more headlines, not even any walls left to separate before and after. Just the simple comfort of knowing you were there. One among millions, trudging through frost and faith alike. Take a slower breath. The kettle cools, the city folds itself into whisper. If you listen closely, you can almost hear footsteps disappearing down an empty Moscow street, the snow softening everything it touches. Let them go. Let history finish its work. Sleep now in the hush that follows rebuilding. The story is done. The machines rest, the lights dim, the hum returns to stillness. And somewhere, beyond that quiet glass of memory, another dawn begins to rise. This time without trumpets, just peace, shorter end of story, sweet dreams.